Some ghosts refuse to stay buried. Montana present day, the setting sun casts long shadows across Silver Pine Ranch as Eleanor Blackwood checks her rifle scope with expert precision. At 63, her hands remain steady, the kind of steadiness that once made her the most feared covert operative in American history. 15 years since she vanished, presumed dead after Sarajevo. 15 years building a new life away from the classified missions that made her a legend, in rooms where hard men make harder decisions. But when three black government SUVs appear on her property, Eleanor knows the past has found her. Colonel Adam Ramirez hasn't come to reminisce about Cold War victories or Middle East interventions. He's come with an ultimatum that will force her to confront the one mission that broke her a school in Sarajevo. 37 children and a single perfect shot that haunts her dreams. Tonight, the legendary Phantom must decide surrender to old handlers or stand her ground against forces that once shaped American foreign policy through blood and shadow. The morning sun painted long shadows across Clearwater Valley as Eleanor Blackwood moved through her daily routine with practiced precision. At 63, her movements remained fluid and purposeful, belying the decades of hard work that had weathered her hands and etched fine lines around her eyes. The 300-acre ranch she'd maintained since her husband Robert's passing 5 years ago was modest by Montana standards, but the Silver Pine spread bore the hallmarks of meticulous care: sturdy fences, well-maintained buildings, and healthy livestock. Eleanor paused on her porch, nursing a steaming cup of coffee as she surveyed her property. The weathered farmhouse she and Robert had built together stood like a sentinel against the backdrop of distant mountains, its white paint gleaming in the early light. Alongside it, the barn and equipment sheds formed a protective perimeter around the central yard. To any observer, it was simply another small cattle operation, managed by a widow too stubborn to sell and move to town. Only Eleanor knew what lay hidden beneath the floorboards of the tack room. A custom Winchester rifle with hand-carved stock, a Colt revolver with pearl inlay, and a locked box containing newspaper clippings, letters, and a leather-bound journal. Remnants of a life she'd buried 15 years ago, when she and Robert had settled in this quiet corner of Montana. Her dog Scout, a shepherd collie mix with intelligent eyes, trotted up from his morning patrol of the perimeter, settling at her feet with a contented sigh. "All quiet, old friend?" she asked, receiving a soft whine in response. The distant rumble of an approaching vehicle drew her attention to the long dirt road that connected Silver Pine to the nearest highway. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, her body instinctively shifting into a more balanced stance. Visitors were rare this far out, especially this early. A dust cloud preceded the battered pickup truck that eventually came into view. Eleanor relaxed slightly as she recognized the vehicle belonging to Liam Harper, the 19-year-old son of her nearest neighbor. "Morning, Mrs. Blackwood," Liam called as he stepped from the truck, his lanky frame unfolding awkwardly. "Pa asked me to drop by and let you know there's been some trouble over at the Henderson place." Eleanor's expression remained neutral, but her grip on the coffee mug tightened imperceptibly. "What kind of trouble?" "Strangers," Liam replied, fidgeting with his hat. "3 black SUVs showed up yesterday, men in suits walking the property like they own it already. Henderson family cleared out overnight, didn't tell anyone they were leaving." "And Sheriff Morrison?" Eleanor asked, her voice carefully measured. Liam shrugged. "Says there's nothing illegal about city folks buying property, but Pa says it doesn't feel right. Said I should warn you to keep your eyes open." Eleanor nodded, thanking the boy with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As Liam's truck disappeared down the drive, she turned toward the barn, her pace quickening. Inside, she moved past the stalls to the tack room, kneeling beside a worn saddle rack. With practiced movements, she released a hidden catch, revealing a compartment beneath the floorboards. Her fingers brushed the smooth pearl grip of the Colt before moving to a small leather-bound book. For a moment she hesitated, then opened it to reveal not a journal, but a collection of phone numbers, each associated with a single name. Eleanor's whisper barely disturbed the dust motes floating in the shaft of morning light. "They found me!" Eleanor saddled Whisper, her dapple-gray mare, with efficient movements that spoke of decades in the saddle. The horse stood patiently as Eleanor secured saddlebags containing binoculars, water, and the Colt revolver now holstered at her hip, hidden beneath her worn denim jacket. "Let's see what we're dealing with, girl," she murmured, swinging into the saddle with a grace that defied her years. They rode to the ridge that formed the eastern boundary of her property, following game trails through stands of lodgepole pine. The elevation offered a commanding view of the surrounding valley, including the Henderson place. 3 miles distant, Eleanor dismounted, tethering Whisper to a twisted juniper before crawling the final yards to the ridgeline. Through her binoculars, the scene at the Henderson ranch confirmed her fears. 3 black SUVs were parked in a precise formation near the main house. Men in tactical gear rather than suits patrolled the perimeter, their movements betraying military training. A tall figure with silver-streaked hair directed operations from the porch, occasionally consulting a tablet. Eleanor's breath caught as the man turned, revealing a face she hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. Colonel Adam Ramirez, former commander of Special Projects Division, the man who had once recruited a promising young sharpshooter named Eleanor Hayes from the Olympic qualifying trials, transforming her into the Phantom, the most lethal distance elimination specialist in the government's Black Operations Program. Memories surfaced like shrapnel, the weight of a custom Barrett rifle against her shoulder, the calculated rhythm of her breathing as she waited for the perfect shot, the clinical detachment with which she'd ended the lives of designated targets across 6 continents until Sarajevo. Until the school, Eleanor forced the memories down, focusing on the immediate threat. Ramirez wasn't here by coincidence. The careful grid pattern of his men's movements suggested they were searching for something, or someone. As if sensing her scrutiny, Ramirez suddenly looked up toward the ridge. Eleanor withdrew, though she knew she was well beyond visual detection range. That movement, that instinctive scanning of high ground, confirmed her suspicions. Ramirez hadn't come as a real estate investor or developer. He'd come as a hunter. The ride back to the ranch was swift, Eleanor's mind racing through calculations and contingencies. Inside the house, she retrieved a satellite phone from a hidden compartment in the pantry, hesitating only briefly before dialing the first number from her leather book. Jackson? A gruff voice answered on the 3rd ring. It's Phantom. Eleanor said the code name, feeling foreign on her tongue after so many years. A beat of silence followed. I'll be damned, thought you were dead. So that was the idea, Marcus. What's wrong? The immediate shift in his tone conveyed decades of trust. Ramirez found me. He's here with a team. I need to know why, and I need backup. Another pause. Give me 24 hours. Keep your head down until then. Eleanor ended the call, moving methodically through the house, collecting essentials and weapons from their various hiding places. She and Robert had designed this home with multiple escape routes and defensible positions, never explicitly acknowledging why such features were necessary, but both understanding the shadows of her past might one day reach for her. At the kitchen table, she unfolded county maps marking access routes, water sources, and potential ambush points. The tactician she'd once been emerged from dormancy, evaluating terrain and calculating odds with cold precision. Scout whined at her feet, sensing the shift in his mistress's demeanor. It's all right, boy, Eleanor soothed, though her eyes remained fixed on the maps. We've prepared for this. We just need to hold out until the cavalry arrives. Outside, the Montana afternoon had turned golden, casting long shadows across the meadow, where her small herd of cattle grazed peacefully. Eleanor moved to the window, watching this life she'd built with Robert, this redemptive existence that had slowly healed wounds she'd thought would never close. They would not take this from her, not without a fight. The distant reflection of sunlight on metal caught her eye. Binoculars, perhaps, or a rifle scope. On the ridge she'd visited earlier, they were watching, and soon they would come. The black SUVs appeared just before sunset, their approach unhurried and deliberate as they rolled up the long drive to Silver Pine Ranch. Eleanor watched from the porch, Scout rigid with tension beside her, her stance casual but her eyes sharp as cut glass. She'd changed into a simple blue chambray shirt and jeans, a wardrobe choice calculated to project unassuming vulnerability, though the Colt remained concealed at the small of her back. 3 vehicles, 6 men in total emerging in precise formation, and then Ramirez himself stepping from the lead SUV with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to authority. Time had weathered him, the black hair now salted with gray, deeper lines bracketing his mouth. But his obsidian eyes remained unchanged, cold and calculating as they swept over the property before settling on Eleanor. Mrs. Blackwood, he called, approaching with a smile that never reached those eyes. May I say you're looking well for a dead woman? Eleanor didn't flinch. This is private property, Colonel. Whatever business you think you have with me ended a long time ago. Ramirez stopped at the foot of the steps, maintaining a respectful distance that Eleanor recognized as tactical rather than courteous. Did it? I don't recall ever receiving your resignation. In fact, the last official record of Eleanor Hayes indicates she died in a house fire in Oregon 2009. Perhaps she did. A humorless chuckle escaped Ramirez. The same precision, the same economy of words. You haven't changed as much as you think, Phantom. The use of her operational designation sent an involuntary chill down Eleanor's spine. Behind Ramirez, his men had spread out in a loose semicircle, hands resting near concealed weapons. Eleanor calculated angles, distances, response times. Automatic assessments bred from years of training. What do you want? She asked, maintaining her outward calm. A conversation. Nothing more. Ramirez gestured to the porch. May I? Eleanor stepped aside, allowing him to ascend the steps while signaling Scout to stay alert with a subtle hand command. She did not invite him inside. You've built quite the life here, Ramirez observed, surveying the well-maintained ranch. Robert Blackwood, former Marine Distinguished Service Record, died of cancer 5 years ago. His gaze returned to Eleanor. Did he know who he married? Everything. Eleanor replied, the single word carrying the weight of 1,000 conversations of trust earned and given, of redemption, sought and found in the eyes of a good man. Ramirez nodded, seemingly unsurprised. We need you, Eleanor. One last mission. I'm retired. Nobody retires from the division. You know that. Eleanor's laugh was hollow. And yet here I am, tending cattle and fixing fences. Find someone else for your wet work. Adam, that life is behind me. Ramirez's expression hardened. This isn't just any operation, it's Calliope. The name hit Eleanor like a physical blow, memories surging back with devastating clarity. A mission gone catastrophically wrong, coordinates changed mid-operation, a school where intelligence had indicated a terrorist cell's headquarters. 37 children. Her bullet, her responsibility. Calliope was shut down, she said through clenched teeth. After Sarajevo. After what you made me do. Not shut down, paused. Ramirez stepped closer. The intelligence was correct, Eleanor. There was a cell there, but they used the children as shields. What happened wasn't your fault. Get off my property. Eleanor's voice was deadly quiet. Ramirez sighed, reaching into his jacket to produce a slim file folder. Hassan al-Zahawi, the man who authorized using that school as cover. The man who sacrificed those children for operational security. He's resurfaced, operating on U.S. soil planning. Something significant. Eleanor didn't take the folder. That's not my problem anymore. It became your problem again when he identified you as the operative responsible for Sarajevo. He's looking for you, Eleanor, and unlike me, he's not interested in a conversation. A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the soft rustle of wind through the pines. You have 24 hours to reconsider, Ramirez finally said, placing the folder on the porch railing. After that, my team pulls out, and you're on your own against whatever al-Zahawi sends your way. He stepped back, his eyes boring into hers. For what it's worth, I did try to protect you. The fire in Oregon was my idea, a chance for you to disappear properly. How considerate, Eleanor replied coldly. As Ramirez descended the steps, he paused. That boy who delivered the message this morning, Liam Harper, isn't it? Son of your nearest neighbor, al-Zahawi, doesn't discriminate between targets and collateral damage. Remember that when you're making your decision. Eleanor watched silently as the SUVs departed dust clouds, swallowing their taillights as they vanished down the long drive. Only when they had completely disappeared did she allow her carefully maintained composure to crack her breath, coming in short, controlled gasps as she fought against the tide of memories threatening to drown her. Scout pressed against her leg, grounding her in the present. Eleanor knelt, burying her fingers in the dog's thick fur. It's happening again, she whispered, more to herself than to the animal. They're pulling me back in. Her gaze fell on the folder Ramirez had left. With reluctant fingers, she opened it to find a single photograph, not of Hassan al-Zahawi, but of her own ranch taken from the ridge that morning, with her clearly visible on the porch. A message and a warning. They had found her, and others could too. The sun had set completely now, leaving the valley in darkness, pierced only by a blanket of stars. Eleanor stared into the night, feeling the walls of the life she'd built beginning to crumble around her. Morning arrived with a brittle clarity, the kind of crystalline Montana day that typically renewed Eleanor's sense of purpose. Today it only illuminated the precariousness of her situation. She moved through her chores with mechanical efficiency, feeding livestock, mending a section of fence, all while scanning the horizon for threats. Scout shadowed her movements, the dog's usual playfulness, replaced by vigilant attentiveness that mirrored her own tension. By mid-morning, Eleanor found herself in the barn's tack room, the hidden compartment open before her. She lifted out a weather journal, her actual journal, not the decoy address book, and began to leaf through pages filled with Robert's neat handwriting, alternating with her own more angular script. Their shared chronicle begun when Robert had recognized the haunted look in her eyes for what it was. Not the grief of a woman who'd lost family as she'd initially claimed, but the soul-deep exhaustion of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's darkness. "I know what it looks like when someone's running," he'd told her during their third meeting at the feed store in town. "I'm not asking what are from. I'm asking if you'd like to stop running for a while." Eleanor traced her fingers over a passage from their second year together. You said something in your sleep last night. A name, Amina, a child. In a place I never should have been, doing something I can never undo. The past lives in us, but we don't have to live in the past." The sound of an approaching vehicle snapped Eleanor back to the present. She quickly replaced the journal, closed the hidden compartment, and moved to the barn entrance, hand instinctively reaching for the pistol at her back. A mud-splattered pickup truck she didn't recognize pulled up beside the house. The man who emerged moved with the measured grace of a predator, tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped silver hair and watchful eyes that scanned the property before settling on Eleanor. Despite the 15 years since she'd seen him, she would have recognized Marcus Jackson anywhere. "Your security is for shit, Phantom," he called by way of greeting, the familiar rasp in his voice bringing an unexpected lump to her throat. "I counted 3 approaches without coverage, and your barn door hinges need oil." "Good to see you too, Spectre," Eleanor replied, using his old operational designation as she approached. They regarded each other for a moment, these two veterans of Shadow Wars, each cataloging the changes time had wrought. Then Marcus's weathered face creased in a rare smile, and he pulled Eleanor into a brief, fierce embrace. "Thought you were dead," he murmured before releasing her. "That was the idea," Eleanor replied, leading him toward the house. "Coffee's hot." Inside, Eleanor poured 2 mugs while Marcus settled at the kitchen table, his back to the wall, eyes maintaining line of sight to both the front door and the window overlooking the drive. "Ramirez found me," Eleanor said without preamble, sliding a mug toward him. "Showed up yesterday with a team, says Hassan al-Zahawi is in the country and gunning for me over Sarajevo." Marcus's expression darkened. "That tracks with intel I've been gathering. Al-Zahawi resurfaced about 6 months ago, operating through proxies. There are whispers he's planning something big on U.S. soil, a statement piece. And Ramirez wants me to take him out before he can—" Eleanor's tone was flat. "What did you tell him?" "To get off my property." Marcus's laugh was short and without humor. "I bet that went over well." He sobered quickly. "If Ramirez found you, Al-Zahawi won't be far behind. The division might be shady as hell, but they've got resources and protocols. Al-Zahawi just has fanatics with nothing to lose." Eleanor stared into her coffee, weighing options, calculating risks. "I won't go back to that life. Marcus, I can't." "Then we need to get you out. New identity, new location." "No." The word emerged with quiet certainty. "This is my home. The life Robert and I built. I'm not running again." Marcus studied her, his expression unreadable. "Then we fight. But not alone." He withdrew a satellite phone from his jacket. "I made some calls on the drive up. Dominic is in Idaho, can be here by nightfall. Thalia's in Calgary, about 16 hours out. Rico's gone civilian, but he's still the best demo guy in the business. He'll come for you. Eleanor felt a complex surge of emotion, gratitude, nostalgia, guilt. Hearing these names, her former team members, who'd once entrusted their lives to her judgment as their squad leader. I can't ask them to risk everything. You didn't ask, Marcus interrupted firmly. I did. And they're coming. Old ghosts, stick together. Phantom. The nickname no longer felt foreign. Eleanor realized like slipping into a well-worn jacket found in the back of a closet, familiar, carrying memories both comforting and painful. Ramirez gave me 24 hours to reconsider, she said. That deadline's approaching. When I refuse again, he pulls his people out, leaving us exposed to whatever Al-Zahawi sends our way. Marcus leaned forward, his expression intent. What does your gut tell you about Ramirez showing up now after all these years? Eleanor considered the question carefully. That there's more to the story than he's sharing. Ramirez never had a straightforward operation in his life. There's an angle he's playing. My thoughts exactly. Marcus sipped his coffee. So we prepare as if everyone's an enemy until proven otherwise. Outside Scout's bark shattered the moment. Not his warning bark, but the excited greeting reserved for people he recognized and trusted. Eleanor moved to the window to see Liam Harper's truck pulling up to the house. The neighbor kid, she explained to Marcus, who had already shifted to a position beside the door, hand beneath his jacket. Harmless, but observant. We'll need to be careful what he sees. As Liam emerged from his truck, Eleanor caught the anxiety in his posture, the furtive glances toward the road he'd just traveled. Something's wrong, she murmured, moving toward the door. Mrs. Blackwood. Liam called, his young voice cracking slightly. Think you should know. Those same men in the black SUVs, they were at our place this morning asking about you. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Marcus. The timeline had just accelerated. What did your father tell them? She asked, keeping her voice calm for the boy's sake. Nothing much, but after they left, he told me to ride over and warn you. Liam hesitated, clearly troubled. They didn't look like businessmen to me. Mrs. Blackwood, they look like the Special Forces guys who came to our school for Veterans Day. Is everything okay? Before Eleanor could formulate a response that wouldn't terrify the young man, Marcus stepped forward, his demeanor shifting subtly to that of a benign older relative. Just some government bureaucrats confused about property lines, son, he said with a disarming smile. Your dad did right, sending you to warn us, though. Much appreciated. Liam's eyes darted between them, uncertainty written across his youthful features. If you say so, sir. Pa said to tell you, you're welcome at our place if you need anything. Thank your father for us, Eleanor replied, forcing warmth into her voice despite the ice forming in her stomach. We'll be fine. As Liam's truck disappeared down the drive, Marcus's false smile evaporated. Ramirez is canvassing the neighbors, establishing your pattern of movements, relationships, vulnerabilities. Standard pre-operation protocol. Eleanor acknowledged grimly. He's going to move against me regardless of my answer. Then we'd better start fortifying this place. Marcus concluded, scanning the property with new intensity. Your team will be here by morning. Until then, it's just us against whatever comes out of the darkness. Eleanor found herself reflexively reaching for the scar tissue on her left shoulder, remnant of a Sarajevo bullet that had found her after she'd realized the magnitude of her mistake. The physical wound had healed long ago. The deeper ones never had, like old times. She said softly, though there was no nostalgia in her voice, only resolution. Twilight descended over Silver Pine Ranch, painting the weathered buildings in deepening shades of purple and gray. Eleanor and Marcus had spent the afternoon implementing hasty defensive measures, creating clear fields of fire, establishing fallback positions, concealing weapons caches at strategic points throughout the property. The work was grimly familiar muscle memory from years of operations in hostile territory, though never before had Eleanor applied these skills to protect a home rather than secure a temporary position. Now they sat on the porch watching the last light fade from the valley, a deceptive tranquility settling over the landscape. Scout lay at Eleanor's feet, ears periodically swiveling toward sounds human ears couldn't detect. Your neighbors, Marcus said, breaking a comfortable silence. The Harpers. How well do you know them? Eleanor considered the question. Frank Harper's solid Vietnam vet runs a respectable cattle operation about 5 miles west. His son Liam has worked for me part-time since Robert died. Good kid, eager to learn. Can they be trusted if things go sideways? Frank would help without asking questions. He's that kind of man. Marcus nodded, understanding the unspoken assessment. Allies but civilians to be protected rather than enlisted. What about the town Clearwater right? How connected are you there? I go in for supplies twice a month, exchange pleasantries with shopkeepers, attend the occasional community event. Eleanor shrugged slightly. I'm the quiet widow who keeps to herself, but always pays her bills on time. So no one who would notice or care if black SUVs started showing up at your property? Sheriff Morrison might. He checks on the outlying ranches during bad weather, has a soft spot for Robert's memory. Their conversation halted at the distinctive sound of an approaching motorcycle, a powerful engine being pushed hard. Marcus was on his feet in an instant, moving to a position beside the porch pillar. Hand inside his jacket, Eleanor remained seated, though her posture shifted subtly, ready to move in any direction. Headlights appeared at the bend in the drive, followed by the sleek form of a high-performance motorcycle that pulled up alongside Marcus's truck in a controlled slide. The rider dismounted with fluid grace, tall and lean in black riding leathers, removing a helmet to reveal close-cropped dark hair, framing a face with sharp cheekbones and watchful eyes. Cutting it close as usual, Dominic. Marcus called, tension easing from his stance. Had to take the scenic route. The newcomer replied, his British accent crisp despite the weariness evident in his voice. Spotted surveillance on the main highway, 15 miles out. Classic two-car rotation amateurs. Surinoi. Eleanor rose as Dominic approached the porch, his expression softening as their eyes met. The ghost herself, he said quietly, looking considerably less dead than advertised. It's good to see you, Dom. Eleanor replied, genuine warmth suffusing her voice. Wish it were under better circumstances, love. He ascended the steps, dropping a weathered duffel bag at his feet. Marcus filled me in on the basics. Ramirez turning up like a bad penny. Hassan breathing down our necks. Just like Belgrade all over again. Not quite, Eleanor countered. In Belgrade we had government backing and an extraction plan. Dominic's laugh was short and without humor. Fair point. Though I recall that extraction plan went spectacularly to hell. They all did, eventually, Marcus added dryly. The three former operatives moved inside where Eleanor prepared a simple meal of stew and bread. They ate with the efficient appreciation of people accustomed to taking sustenance when available regardless of circumstances. Afterward, they gathered around the kitchen table where Eleanor had spread out detailed maps of her property and the surrounding area. The ranch has 3 main access points, she explained, indicating positions on the map. The main drive from the east, a service road connecting to national forest land to the north, and a creek crossing to the southwest that's passable in dry conditions. Dominic studied the terrain with a professional eye. Defensible, but too much perimeter for 3 people to secure properly. 4 when Thalia arrives, Marcus corrected. 5 if Rico makes it. Still stretched thin, Dominic mused. What's your assessment of Ramirez's team numbers capabilities? Eleanor recalled the men she'd observed at the Henderson property. At least 8 operators, movement suggests military training. Likely ex-special forces. Well-equipped, disciplined. Ramirez only brought 2 vehicles with 6 men when he visited, which means he kept part of his force in reserve. Classic Ramirez, Marcus muttered, never showing his full hand. The conversation paused at the sound of tires on gravel. Through the window, headlights illuminated the yard as a mud-splattered SUV pulled up beside Dominic's motorcycle. The driver's door opened to reveal a compact woman with auburn hair streaked with silver, moving with the controlled alertness of a coiled spring. Thalia. Eleanor breathed, something like relief washing through her. She made better time than expected. Would you expect anything less? Dominic replied with a half smile. The reunion that followed carried the weight of shared history. embraces between comrades who had once depended on each other for survival. Thalia Chen, their former communications and intelligence specialist, had aged gracefully, laugh lines around her eyes belying the sharpness of her gaze that missed nothing. "Place looks exactly like you described it in your letters," she told Eleanor after initial greetings. "Right down to the crooked weather vane on the barn." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "Letters I never. Robert wrote to me," Talia explained gently. "Every Christmas kept me updated on your life here, without ever explicitly confirming it was you. Smart man, your husband." A complex emotion passed over Eleanor's face. Surprise, tenderness, and a hint of betrayal that Robert had maintained such a connection without her knowledge. "He knew someday we might need to find you." Thalia continued reading Eleanor's expression with the same acuity that had once made her invaluable in the field. "He made me promise only to use the information if you were in danger." The revelation settled over Eleanor like a physical weight. Even in their most honest moments together, Robert had maintained this small deception, not out of distrust, but from a desire to protect her. The realization was both comforting and painful. Robert was always the contingency planner. She finally said, her voice steady, despite the emotion behind it. With Thalia's arrival, they returned to tactical discussion positions, being assigned equipment inventoried, the familiarity of the process. Preparing for conflict with these specific people created a disorienting sense of time collapse for Eleanor, as if the peaceful years at Silver Pine had been merely an interlude rather than the true substance of her life. "I still have contacts in intelligence circles," Thalia explained as she unpacked communication equipment from her vehicle. "Ramirez has been operating with decreasing official sanction for years. Word is Calliope was his personal obsession, not sanctioned policy. After Sarajevo, he was nearly dismissed, but he had too much compromising information on his superiors." "And Al-Zahawi?" Eleanor asked, the name still difficult to voice. "Very real threat. He's built a new network more sophisticated than before, but my sources indicate he's working with a smaller specialized team for whatever he's planning on. U.S. soil." The implication hung in the air. The confrontation coming to Silver Pine Ranch would not be a large-scale assault, but a targeted operation on both sides. A chess match with lethal stakes. As midnight approached, Rico finally arrived. A stocky, middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard and hands that never seemed to stop moving. The team's former demolitions and technical specialist embraced Eleanor with unexpected gentleness. "Never thought I'd see the Phantom again in this lifetime," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "You look good, boss. Peace suits you." "Suited?" Eleanor corrected quietly. Past tense, apparently. With the team assembled, a palpable shift occurred in the atmosphere of the ranch house. Despite the years and distance that had separated them, they fell naturally into old patterns. Marcus organizing security rotations, Dominic checking and cleaning weapons, Thalia establishing communications and monitoring channels, Rico inventorying household items that could be repurposed for defensive measures. In the midst of this coordinated activity, Eleanor stepped outside for a moment alone, the crisp night air filling her lungs as she gazed up at stars so bright and numerous they seemed close enough to touch the scout. Padded silently beside her, a warm presence against her leg. "This was never supposed to touch them," she whispered to the dog to the night, to Robert's memory. "This life was supposed to be different." Shin. Yet as she looked back at the warm glow of light from her windows, at the silhouettes of her former team, her friends moving with purpose within, Eleanor felt a contradictory sense of rightness alongside her regret. These people knew her, truly knew her, in ways even Robert, for all his compassion and insight, never could. They shared the weight of things done in shadow, carried the same scars, both visible and hidden. Tomorrow would bring Ramirez's deadline, and with it decisions that couldn't be undone. But tonight, surrounded by the only family she had left, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of bitter gratitude for ghosts who refused to stay buried. Her own and those who had come to stand with her one last time. Dawn broke over Silver Pine Ranch in a blaze of amber and gold, illuminating a property transformed overnight by the presence of Eleanor's team. To a casual observer, little would appear changed. The same weathered buildings, the same cattle grazing in distant pastures, But subtle alterations marked the landscape, slightly repositioned, vehicles creating better cover, imperceptible tripwires at key approach points, communication equipment concealed beneath ordinary-looking solar panels. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, watching as Thalia efficiently monitored multiple devices spread before her. The others were positioned throughout the property. Marcus at the ridge line with long-range optics, Dominic patrolling the perimeter, Rico completing final adjustments to hasty defensive measures. Movement on the main road. Thalia reported without looking up from her screens. 3 vehicles, same signature as yesterday. Ramirez is punctual, I'll give him that. Eleanor nodded, rising to her feet with deliberate calm. She'd dressed carefully that morning. Practical ranch clothes, but her best pair of jeans. A crisp blue shirt, hair pulled back in a neat braid, presenting herself not as a cornered operative, but as a property owner receiving unwanted visitors. The Colt remained concealed at her back, a comforting weight. Incoming transmission. Thalia added, tilting her head as she listened to an earpiece. Marcus confirms visual contact. Standard approach formation. 8 personnel visible. Shaturunam, time to greet our guests. Eleanor replied, moving toward the door. Keep everyone on standby, but no provocative actions unless I signal. Outside, Eleanor positioned herself on the porch, Scout at her side, presenting an image of solitary vigilance as the convoy of black SUVs made its way up the long drive. They parked in the same formation as before, and once again Ramirez emerged from the lead vehicle today, dressed in tactical clothing rather than his previous business attire. A subtle but significant shift signaling preparation for operational activities. Your deadline arrives as promised, Colonel, Eleanor called as Ramirez approached. My answer remains unchanged. Ramirez paused at the foot of the steps, his dark eyes scanning the property with practiced assessment. You've been busy, he observed mildly. New security measures, and unless I miss my guess, you're not alone anymore. My home, my business, Eleanor replied evenly. Marcus Jackson arrived yesterday afternoon. Ramirez continued as if she hadn't spoken. Dominic Keller came in the evening on a Ducati motorcycle. Thalia Chen and Ricardo Vega arrived overnight. His smile was cold. Did you think we wouldn't be monitoring the approaches to your property? Eleanor refused to show surprise at his detailed knowledge. If you know my team is here, then you understand the odds have shifted significantly. Have they? Ramirez's tone remained conversational. 5 aging operatives, however skilled against my current resources. Mathematics isn't in your favor, Eleanor. We've overcome worse, at a terrible cost, as I recall. Ramirez ascended 2 steps, stopping as Scout emitted a low growl. Hassan al-Zahawi will not be deterred by your reunion of ghosts. His people are already in the country, already moving toward their objective, which now includes you. You seem very certain of his intentions. We've been tracking his network for years. Intercepted communications explicitly mention the Phantom as a priority target. Eleanor's expression remained impassive, though inwardly she calculated the implications of this information. Whether it represented truth, partial truth, or fabrication designed to manipulate her. Even if that's true, she replied carefully, it doesn't explain why you're so determined to pull me back into an operation I left behind 15 years ago. There are other snipers, other operatives without my history with the target. Ramirez's expression shifted, something like genuine emotion briefly breaking through his controlled exterior. Because I owe you the truth about Sarajevo and the chance to balance the scales. The truth. Eleanor's voice hardened. I know the truth. You gave me coordinates for a terrorist leadership meeting. Those coordinates were a school. 37 children died because of my bullet, because of your intelligence failure. It wasn't a failure, Ramirez said quietly. It was a calculation. The simple admission struck Eleanor like a physical blow, momentarily stealing her breath. What? Hassan's group was indeed meeting there. They deliberately chose the school as cover, believing it would deter any strike. Ramirez's gaze never wavered. The intelligence community determined the potential future casualties from their planned operations, justified the immediate collateral damage. And you didn't tell me, Eleanor whispered, rage building beneath her carefully maintained composure. You let me believe it was a mistake. Would you have taken the shot if you'd known? The question hung between them, unanswerable, because Eleanor herself didn't know with certainty, couldn't separate the person she had been then from the person shaped by the aftermath of that terrible day. That calculation destroyed me. She finally said, it haunts every moment of my life. It was war, Ramirez replied, though something in his voice suggested the justification had worn thin, even for him over the years. Terrible choices made by people far from the consequences. And now you want me to make another terrible choice, to kill again, to stop a mass casualty attack on American soil, to prevent more Sarajevos. Ramirez withdrew a tablet from his jacket, turning it to display satellite imagery. We've located Hassan's compound in North Dakota. Remote, heavily guarded, but with clear approach vectors for someone with your particular skills. One shot, Eleanor, one target. Then you return to your cattle and your quiet life, with the division's guarantee of permanent non-interference. Eleanor studied the images, her tactician's mind automatically analyzing. Distances cover angles, even as she despised herself for the instinctive assessment. And if I refuse again, Ramirez's expression hardened, then my team withdraws as promised, leaving you exposed to whatever comes next. Hassan knows where you are. His people will come for you, for your team, and for anyone unfortunate enough to be nearby when they arrive. He gestured toward the distant Harper property. Your neighbors. The town you occasionally visit, Hassan doesn't distinguish between targets and those who shelter them, however unwittingly. The threat was explicit, now no longer veiled in diplomatic language. Eleanor felt a cold fury building within her, directed not just at Ramirez, but at the inexorable machinery of violence that refused to release her from its gears. You never intended to give me a real choice, she observed, her voice deadly quiet. This was always coercion disguised as recruitment. I'm giving you the only choice available. Eleanor controlled re-engagement on our terms or chaotic bloodshed on theirs. Before she could respond, Eleanor's attention was drawn to movement at the edge of her property. A vehicle approaching not on the main drive, but along the rough service road from the north. Not one of Ramirez's tactical SUVs, but a familiar pickup truck. Liam, she breathed, recognizing Frank Harper's vehicle with his son at the wheel. Ramirez turned to follow her gaze, his expression calculating as he observed the approaching truck. Your young neighbor seems to have unfortunate timing. For if anything happens to that boy, Eleanor began, her hand instinctively moving toward the concealed Colt. That's entirely up to you. Ramirez cut her off. Accept the mission. Eleanor, take out Hassan. Protect what you built here. The pickup truck drew closer, and Eleanor could see Liam's face through the windshield. His expression curious as he observed the gathering of black vehicles in the yard. The innocent arrival crystallized her impossible position, cornered between the specter of her past and the threat to her present, with civilians unknowingly wandering into the crossfire. 24 hours. She finally said, each word precisely measured. I need 24 hours to consider your proposal and consult with my team. Ramirez studied her face, searching for deception. 12, he countered, and as a show of good faith will maintain surveillance of your property against potential hostile approaches. Your surveillance is the hostile approach I'm concerned about, Eleanor replied coldly. A thin smile crossed Ramirez's face. 12 hours, Eleanor. I'll return at sunset for your answer. He nodded toward Liam's approaching truck. Better greet your visitor. Explain away our presence, however you see fit. As Ramirez descended the steps and returned to his vehicle, Eleanor forced herself to adopt a casual posture, raising a hand in greeting toward Liam, as if nothing unusual were occurring. The black SUVs began a coordinated departure, pulling away just as the pickup truck entered the main yard. Mrs. Blackwood, Liam called uncertainly as he emerged from his vehicle, eyes tracking the departing convoy. Everything okay? Pa sent me to drop off the feed supplement you ordered. But if this is a bad time, it's fine, Liam. Eleanor replied with a warmth she didn't feel. Just some government land management officials checking property boundaries. Nothing to worry about. The lie came easily, too easily, Eleanor thought a reminder of how quickly old patterns reasserted themselves. Liam seemed to accept the explanation, though his eyes lingered curiously on Marcus, who had appeared at the edge of the barn, maintaining a casual but watchful presence. My uncle, Eleanor explained smoothly. In town for a visit with some old friends. You might see them around the property over the next few days. After helping Liam unload the feed supplements and sending him on his way with friendly reassurances, Eleanor returned to the house where her team had gathered, having monitored the entire exchange with Ramirez. You're not actually considering his offer, Marcus stated, rather than asked, his expression troubled. Of course not, Eleanor replied, sinking into a chair at the table. But we needed time to prepare for what comes next. Which is? Thalia prompted gently. Eleanor looked at each of them in turn. These people who had answered her call without hesitation, placing themselves in danger for her sake. They deserved the unvarnished truth. Ramirez confirmed what I've suspected since he appeared. Sarajevo wasn't an intelligence failure. The division knew children were present and authorized the strike anyway. They used me as their instrument, then let me believe it was a mistake to preserve my operational effectiveness. A heavy silence followed this revelation. Rico muttered a curse in Spanish. Dominic's expression darkened dangerously. Thalia reached across the table to grasp Eleanor's hand in silent support. That changes the calculation. Marcus finally said, his voice rough with controlled anger. This isn't just about protecting you from Hassan anymore. It's about making Ramirez pay for what he did to all of us. Eleanor shook her head firmly. No, this isn't about revenge. It's about ending the cycle, breaking free completely, not getting pulled back into their game under different terms. So what's the play? Dominic asked. Ever the pragmatist, Eleanor rose, moving to the map spread across the kitchen counter. Ramirez expects me to either accept his mission or prepare for a defensive action here when his people withdraw and Hassan's arrive. We're going to present a third option he won't see coming. Her finger traced a route on the map, eyes alight with the strategic acuity that had once made her the division's most valued operational planner. We're going hunting, she said softly. Not for Hassan, for the truth. Twilight gathered over Silver Pine Ranch, the lengthening shadows concealing preparations that had continued throughout the day. Eleanor stood on the porch, watching the horizon for the approaching convoy she knew would arrive precisely at the appointed hour. Behind her, the ranch house appeared, quiet lights glowing warmly in the windows, the picture of rural tranquility. It was an illusion carefully crafted for Ramirez's surveillance. The reality existed in layers beneath the visible surface. Equipment packed in vehicles, positioned for immediate departure, escape routes cleared, and marked communication systems established. Most importantly, the knowledge Thalia had extracted through her intelligence contacts during the precious hours since Ramirez's ultimatum. They're coming. Dominic's voice spoke quietly in Eleanor's earpiece from his observation post on the ridge. Same formation as before, ETA 3 minutes. Eleanor acknowledged with a subtle tap on her receiver, running through the plan once more in her mind. Everything depended on timing, on maintaining the facade until precisely the right moment. Her years of operational experience told her it was a desperate gambit, with too many variables, too many potential failure points. Her instinct for survival told her it was their only viable option. The black SUVs appeared on schedule, headlights cutting through the gathering darkness as they made their way up the long drive. Eleanor descended the porch steps to meet them in the yard, deliberate vulnerability in her exposed position. Another calculated element of the illusion they were presenting. Ramirez emerged from the lead vehicle, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Your answer, Eleanor, he called without preamble as he approached. I need to know exactly what you're proposing, she replied, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. Full operational parameters, extraction protocols, guarantees of non-interference afterward. A thin smile crossed Ramirez's face, the expression of a man who believed he'd won. So you've decided to be reasonable after all. I've decided to be practical. Eleanor countered. If Hassan is targeting me and this property regardless, taking the fight to him makes strategic sense. But I do it my way with my team. Ramirez reached the spot where she stood close enough now that their conversation couldn't be overheard by his men waiting beside the vehicles. Your conditions. Full intelligence briefing on Hassan's current operation, unrestricted access to division resources for planning and execution. My team remains intact throughout, and afterward, complete disengagement. No monitoring, no interference, no future recruitment attempts. One ambitious demands from someone in your position, Ramirez observed, though his tone suggested a willingness to negotiate rather than outright refusal. My position is stronger than you think. Eleanor replied evenly. You need me specifically for this operation, or you wouldn't have gone to such lengths to find me. That gives me leverage. For a moment, Ramirez studied her face, searching for deception or weakness. Finding neither, he gave a slight nod. We can discuss specifics at our forward operations center. I have a tactical briefing prepared. Here, Eleanor countered firmly, my territory, my terms. You still don't trust me. Ramirez said something like genuine regret, coloring his voice. You lied about Sarajevo for 15 years. Trust isn't on the table. Ramirez accepted this with a resigned sigh. Very well, I'll have the briefing materials brought in. He turned to signal one of his men, and in that moment Eleanor gave the barely perceptible hand signal they'd arranged. 3 fingers brushed against her thigh, a movement invisible to anyone not specifically watching for it. Throughout the property, Eleanor's team moved with synchronized precision. In the barn, Rico activated the electromagnetic pulse device he constructed from Eleanor's generator parts and components, from Thalia's communication equipment. The targeted EMP washed over the yard in an invisible wave, instantly disabling the electronics in Ramirez's vehicles and the communication devices his team carried. Simultaneously, Dominic and Marcus emerged from concealed positions, weapons trained on Ramirez's disoriented men, who were suddenly struggling with dead radios and disabled tactical equipment. From the house, Thalia activated powerful floodlights positioned earlier in the day, bathing the yard in harsh illumination that left Ramirez's team exposed, while Eleanor's people remained in strategic shadow. Ramirez himself froze, understanding flooding his features as he registered the tactical reversal. Impressive, he acknowledged, hands moving slightly away from his sides in a gesture of temporary compliance, though ultimately futile. That depends on your perspective. Eleanor replied, the Colt now visible in her hand, though not directly aimed at him. My team is departing this property tonight. We'll be taking one of your vehicles and 2 of your men as insurance. And where exactly do you think you're going? To find Hassan al-Zahawi, Eleanor stated calmly, but on my terms, not yours. To end this completely, not to become your asset again? Ramirez's laugh held genuine amusement. You always were 3 moves ahead in tactical planning, Eleanor, but you're missing crucial information. Hassan isn't just planning an attack. He's already positioned for it. Target date is within 72 hours. Then I suggest you cooperate fully to improve our chances of stopping him. Eleanor replied, unmoved by what could easily be another manipulation. With practiced efficiency, Eleanor's team secured 2 of Ramirez's operators, selecting those whose body language indicated lower status in the unit hierarchy, more likely to possess information, but less likely to present extreme resistance. The remaining SUV with functioning electronics was commandeered, weapons and equipment transferred according to their predetermined inventory list. Throughout the operation, Eleanor maintained eye contact with Ramirez, watching for signs of hidden countermeasures or deception. His composure never cracked, which concerned her more than any display of anger would have. Adam Ramirez had never been a man who accepted defeat gracefully. His apparent compliance suggested he perceived some advantage in the situation that she couldn't yet discern. You won't get far, he said quietly as Marcus and Rico secured their 2 captives in the commandeered vehicle. Hassan has resources throughout the region, and so do I. Yet you seem remarkably unconcerned about our departure, Eleanor observed, almost as if this serves some purpose of yours. A fleeting expression crossed Ramirez's face. Surprise quickly masked, but not before Eleanor caught it. She'd come closer to the truth than he expected. Perhaps I simply recognize the inevitable, he replied smoothly. You were always going to pursue Hassan your way. At least now you're moving in the right direction, even if the methodology differs from my preference. Eleanor stepped closer, lowering her voice for his ears alone. What aren't you telling me, Adam? What's the real operation here? Stop Hassan, Ramirez replied, his dark eyes unreadable. That's what matters. How it happens is secondary. We're ready, Thalia called from beside the idling SUV, interrupting the tense exchange. Eleanor backed away, maintaining visual contact with Ramirez until she reached the vehicle. His parting words followed her as she climbed into the passenger seat. When you find him, remember Sarajevo. Remember the children, then do what you've always done best. Phantom. The SUV pulled away, leaving Ramirez and his remaining men stranded with disabled vehicles and equipment that would require hours to restore. Giving Eleanor's team the head start they needed, their captives sat secured in the third row under Dominic's watchful guard, while Marcus drove and Thalia coordinated navigation from the middle seat. Rico followed on Dominic's motorcycle, maintaining a staggered position to minimize their profile as a convoy. That went too smoothly, Marcus muttered once they'd reached the main highway, headed east according to the intelligence Thalia had gathered. Ramirez barely put up a fight. He didn't need to, Eleanor replied, staring at the darkness beyond the window. We're still playing his game, just on a different board than he originally proposed. What's our actual destination? Thalia asked, glancing up from her tablet, where she was monitoring police bands and transportation networks for any sign of pursuit or interception. Eleanor turned to face their captives. Two men who'd maintained stoic silence throughout their seizure and transport. Both wore the unmarked tactical gear favored by private military contractors, their expressions professionally neutral despite their compromised position. Let's find out, she said, moving to the third row and addressing the older of the two men directly. You've realized by now we're not terrorists or criminals. We haven't harmed you, and we won't if cooperation is mutual. I need information about Hassan al-Zahawi's current location and operational status. The man, late 40s with the weathered features and vigilant eyes of a career operator, assessed Eleanor carefully before responding. I'm a contracted security specialist for a private intelligence firm. I don't have access to operational intelligence beyond my immediate assignment, which was surveillance and containment of my property. Eleanor completed, but you must have been briefed on the larger context, Hassan al-Zahawi, the Phantom, Sarajevo. These names mean something to you. A flicker of recognition crossed the man's features before he could suppress it. I follow orders. I don't ask questions about historical context. A convenient position, Eleanor noted, but not one that's going to help you in your current situation. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a quiet intensity. Ramirez is using all of us. You, me, Hassan. In some larger game, I need to know what pieces are actually on the board. The younger captive shifted uncomfortably, drawing Eleanor's attention. Less experienced, more likely to reveal information under pressure. You know something, she stated rather than asked, turning her focus to him. Something that doesn't sit right with your professional obligations. The young man glanced at his colleague, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, a warning to remain silent. But Eleanor had seen the hesitation, the moral uncertainty that separated a thinking operator from a mindless weapon. Whatever Ramirez is paying you, she pressed gently, it's not worth being on the wrong side of history. People are going to die unless we get ahead of this. For several tense moments, silence filled the vehicle. Then the younger operative spoke, his voice low but determined. The operation has two phases. Containment of the Phantom, was phase 1. Tracking Hassan to his operational headquarters is phase 2. Kevin, his colleague snapped, operational security. She deserves to know. Kevin replied firmly. After what they did to her in Sarajevo. Eleanor's focus sharpened. What do you know about Sarajevo? Only what was in the briefing packet, that you were given false intelligence about a school being a terrorist meeting site, that afterward you were allowed to believe it was an intelligence failure rather than a calculated decision. The confirmation of Ramirez's admission hit Eleanor with renewed force. It wasn't just his private confession. It was documented part of an operational briefing. And Hassan, she prompted. What's his current status? Kevin hesitated, then continued, apparently having decided to commit fully to cooperation. Intelligence placed him at a compound near the Little Missouri River in western North Dakota as recently as 48 hours ago. But there's movement occurring. Supplies, personnel, something's accelerating. The target, Marcus asked from the driver's seat, eyes briefly meeting Eleanor's in the rear-view mirror. Unknown to us, Kevin replied, but there was mention of symbolic significance, maximum psychological impact. Eleanor processed this information, integrating it with what Thalia had already uncovered through her contacts. Pieces were beginning to align, forming a pattern that chilled her more thoroughly than Ramirez's explicit threats had. Ramirez, let us go, she said quietly, because we're heading exactly where he wants us to go, toward Hassan. But why? Thalia questioned. If he has Hassan's location, why not send in his own tactical team? Why involve you at all? Deniability. Eleanor replied, the realization crystallizing. Whatever's about to happen, the division can't be officially connected to it. They need a rogue element. Me, the disappeared operative with a personal vendetta, to take action they can't authorize through normal channels. Or to take the fall if things go wrong, Marcus added grimly. Eleanor turned back to Kevin. What happens after Hassan is located? What's the extraction protocol? The young operative shook his head. There isn't one specified in our briefing. We were told Phase 2 would be handled by a specialized asset. His eyes met Eleanor's directly. I think that asset is you. The implications settled heavily in the confines of the vehicle. Eleanor was being positioned not just as an assassin, but as a potential scapegoat. The unstable former operative driven by revenge for Sarajevo, acting entirely on her own when she eliminated Hassan al-Zahawi on American soil. Change of plans, she announced her decision immediate and final. We're not going directly to Hassan's compound, we're making a detour. Where to? Dominic asked through the communication link from his position on the motorcycle behind them. Eleanor's expression was resolute as she met the questioning gazes of her team. To the one person who might know what Ramirez is really planning, the one person who was there in Sarajevo besides me? Director Winters. Thalia breathed understanding immediately. Elizabeth Winters. She was division oversight for Calliope. And now she's Deputy Director of National Intelligence. Marcus added, heavily guarded, nearly impossible to reach. Nearly impossible, Eleanor corrected, but not entirely, and she owes me answers before more lives are sacrificed to cover up the truth. As the SUV continued east through the Montana night, its occupants fell into a tense silence, each calculating the enormity of what they were undertaking. Not just the interruption of a terrorist plot, but a direct confrontation with the power structures that had shaped and then discarded them. The stakes had shifted from Eleanor's personal safety to something far larger with implications that none of them could fully predict. In the darkness of the passenger seat, Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, the familiar weight of command settling on her shoulders. A burden she had thought permanently lifted when she'd walked away from the division 15 years ago. Yet here it was again, along with the lives that depended on her judgment, her skill and her willingness to make impossible choices. The ranch, her sanctuary, receded behind them, perhaps forever. Ahead lay conflict and revelation with no certainty of return. The quiet life she had built with Robert seemed suddenly insubstantial, a dream from which she had been rudely awakened. What remained was the phantom, the operative who made difficult decisions with clinical precision, who calculated acceptable losses, who moved through the world like a ghost, leaving little trace beyond the consequences of her actions. I'm sorry, Robert, she whispered to herself as the miles unspooled beneath their wheels. I tried to leave her behind. The first pale light of dawn revealed a nondescript motel on the outskirts of Billings, Montana. The kind of place that asked few questions and noted even fewer details on its registration cards. Eleanor's team had arrived just after midnight, paying cash for 2 adjoining rooms at the far end of the single-story structure, positioning vehicles for quick departure if necessary. Their captives had been separated. Kevin, the cooperative younger operative, remained with Marcus and Rico in one room, while his more resistant colleague was secured in the bathroom of the second room under Dominic's watchful eye. Eleanor and Thalia had converted the remaining space into an impromptu operations center wall covered with maps and printouts, communication equipment arrayed across the small table by the window. Eleanor stood before this collection of intelligence hands braced on the edge of the table, studying the patterns emerging from their overnight research. Thalia had worked tirelessly, leveraging contacts, accessing databases through secured channels, assembling a mosaic of information regarding both Hassan al-Zahawi's movements and director Elizabeth Winters' current activities. Winters is scheduled to attend a private fundraising dinner in Minneapolis tomorrow evening. Thalia reported, looking up from her laptop screen, "Security will be extensive, but focused on external threats rather than close personal surveillance. It's our best opportunity to approach her." "That's still over 500 miles from here," Eleanor noted, tracing the route on the map. "And Hassan's compound is in the opposite direction. We're dividing our already limited resources and time. Or we need answers before we move against Hassan," Thalia countered gently. "Otherwise, we're operating blind, potentially playing into Ramirez's hands." Eleanor nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in this approach, despite her instinct to move directly against the more obvious threat. 15 years ago, she wouldn't have hesitated. The mission parameters would have been clear, the objective singular. But experience had taught her the cost of such narrow focus, of trusting in operational directives, without questioning the larger context. A soft knock at the connecting door preceded Marcus's entrance. His expression grave. "You should hear this," he said without preamble. "Our cooperative friend has been doing some thinking overnight, and he's got information he didn't share initially." Kevin followed Marcus into the room, his hands still loosely bound before him, his face drawn with what appeared to be a night of moral wrestling. The young operative looked directly at Eleanor as he spoke. "There's a secondary protocol I didn't mention yesterday," he began without prompting. "If Hassan evades initial containment, Ramirez is authorized to implement what they're calling a terminal sanction." Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "Define terminal sanction." "A precision strike on Hassan's location, regardless of collateral damage considerations." Kevin explained his discomfort with the concept evident in his tone. "They're prepared to eliminate him along with anyone in proximity. It's why they've been so focused on confirming his exact whereabouts before he moves to his actual target." "Jesus," Marcus muttered. "They're going to drop ordnance on American soil." "They can't," Thalia objected. "The political fallout alone would be catastrophic, not to mention the constitutional implications." "Unless they have perfect deniability," Eleanor said quietly, the pieces aligning with terrible clarity. "Unless the strike could be attributed to Hassan himself, a terrorist attack that went wrong, or a rival faction. The ultimate tragic irony narrative." Kevin nodded solemnly. "That's my assessment as well, based on the operational language and contingency plans." Ramirez was explicit that there must be no direct connection to official channels if the terminal sanction is implemented. The revelation cast their situation in a new and more desperate light. They weren't just racing to prevent a terrorist attack, they were also trying to prevent the government's shadow response that could prove equally devastating. "This is why Ramirez was so willing to let us go," Eleanor concluded, pacing the small confines of the motel room. "He expects us to locate Hassan, to get close to him. We become witnesses who can confirm his presence at the strike location, or even better from his perspective. We become additional casualties whose presence helps sell the cover story. The perfect cleanup operation." Marcus agreed grimly. "Eliminate Hassan, eliminate the Phantom and her inconvenient knowledge about Sarajevo, and create a compelling terrorist incident narrative that justifies expanded counterterrorism powers." Eleanor paused by the window, looking out at the brightening sky with unseeing eyes, her mind racing through implications and alternatives. "We need Winters," she finally said. "She's the only one with the authority to countermand this operation." Assuming she would, Dominic countered from the doorway, where he'd appeared silently listening to the exchange. "She was complicit in the Sarajevo deception. What makes you think she'd intervene now?" "Because this is American soil," Eleanor replied, turning to face her team. "Because even hardened intelligence officials draw lines somewhere. And because Elizabeth Winters, for all her faults, was never cavalier about civilian casualties. She authorized Sarajevo, but I saw her face afterward. It cost her something." The room fell silent as each person considered the dangerous path forward. They were positioning themselves between two lethal forces: Hassan's terrorist operation and Ramirez's terminal sanction, with limited resources and uncertain intelligence. "There's one more thing you should know," Kevin added hesitantly, About Sarajevo. He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. The briefing materials suggested that the school targeting wasn't just about eliminating Hassan's group. There was another objective. Eleanor went completely still. What objective? Testing the psychological resilience of the asset. You, the phantom, evaluating whether you could perform under extreme moral duress. Kevin couldn't meet her eyes as he delivered this final revelation. It was an assessment of your limitation threshold as much as it was a counterterrorism operation. The words landed like physical blows. Eleanor had suspected much over the years, had pieced together fragments of the truth. But this deliberate use of her as both weapon and experimental subject struck deeper than she had imagined possible. The room swam momentarily before her vision, memories of Sarajevo flooding back with renewed intensity. The weight of the rifle, the certainty of her aim, the moment of impact, and then the horrifying realization of what she had done. Marcus moved to her side, his steady presence an anchor as she fought to regain her composure. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "we've got your back. Whatever comes next, whatever we learn, you're not alone in this." She nodded once, straightening her shoulders, drawing on decades of discipline to push the personal aside and focus on the immediate tactical considerations. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, though a new edge of cold determination had entered it. "New plan," she announced. "We split up. Thalia and I will proceed to Minneapolis to intercept Director Winters. Marcus, Dominic, and Rico will conduct reconnaissance on Hassan's compound in North Dakota, but maintain strict surveillance protocols. Observe only no engagement. That leaves each group dangerously undermanned." Dominic objected. "It's our only option, given the timeline." Eleanor countered. "We need information from both sources to formulate an effective response." She turned to Kevin, making a swift evaluation before reaching her decision. "You're coming with me and Thalia. Your colleague stays with Marcus as insurance of your continued cooperation." The young operative nodded, accepting these terms without protest. "What about afterward, when this is over?" "If we survive," Eleanor replied with grim honesty, "we'll discuss your options. Depending on your actions, they may include something other than being treated as an enemy." As the team set about preparing for their divided missions, Eleanor stepped outside into the cool morning air, needing a moment to process the magnitude of what they'd learned. The parking lot was quiet, early morning travelers not yet stirring in the motel rooms, the distant hum of the interstate. The only intrusion on the stillness. Thalia joined her a few minutes later, silently offering a cup of coffee. 15 years, Eleanor said after a while, not looking at her friend, but staring at the mountains visible on the horizon. 15 years I've tried to live with what happened in Sarajevo, telling myself it was a tragic mistake, an intelligence failure. Now I learn it was deliberate, not just the targeting of civilians, but the targeting of me. Testing how far they could push before I broke. "And you did break," Thalia observed softly. "You walked away, disappeared, rebuilt your life. But I thought I had," Eleanor agreed, a bitter edge to her voice. "But here we are again, the same players, the same ruthless calculus of acceptable losses." "With one critical difference," Thalia countered. "This time you know the real game. This time you're not their instrument, but their obstacle." Eleanor considered this, feeling the weight of the cold at her back, remembering the precision and purpose with which she had once wielded her skills. "I told Robert once that I was afraid of becoming the Phantom again, afraid that if I ever reopened that door, I might not be able to close it." "What did he say?" Thalia asked gently. A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. "He said we're all made of many selves, and the trick isn't locking away the parts we fear, but integrating them into a whole we can live with." She turned to face Thalia directly. "I've spent 15 years keeping the Phantom sealed away. Now I need her. But I'm terrified of what happens after." Thalia's expression was one of deep understanding. "The person you were then was defined by others, shaped by training, directed by handlers, evaluated for compliance. The person you are now, even with those same skills, makes her own choices." She reached out to briefly clasp Eleanor's shoulder. "That's the difference that matters." Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus emerging from the motel room, satellite phone in hand. "We've got movement," he reported tersely. One of Thalia's contacts at the Department of Defense reports unusual aerial activity being approved for western North Dakota surveillance drones, ostensibly for border security exercises. They're establishing observation of Hassan's compound. Eleanor interpreted immediately, preparing for the terminal sanction option. Timeline. Thalia asked, already moving back toward their room. Unknown, Marcus replied, but it accelerates our schedule considerably. As they re-entered the motel room to finalize their divided missions, Eleanor felt the familiar pre-operation focus descending. The narrowing of attention, the crystallization of priorities, the cold evaluation of risks and resources. The phantom was indeed awakening within her, but this time under her control, serving her purposes rather than the division's. Director Winters, first, she confirmed as they gathered their equipment. She's the linchpin. She has the authority to stop Ramirez's terminal sanction. We get to her, convince her to intervene, then consolidate our efforts against Hassan. And if she refuses, Dominic asked his expression, making clear he considered this the more likely outcome. Eleanor met his gaze without hesitation. Then we do what we've always done. We improvise, adapt, and overcome. She checked her weapon with practice. Retry Claude hit the max length for a message and has paused its response. You can write, continue to keep the chat going, and in continue edit, I'll continue the story. Eleanor checked her weapon with practiced precision, then looked at each member of her team in turn. If we fail, millions of lives hang in the balance. Those Hassan intends to take, and those who would be sacrificed in Ramirez's terminal sanction. We move now. The Minneapolis skyline gleamed in the late afternoon, sunglass and steel towers, reflecting golden light as Eleanor and Thalia approached the city in a nondescript sedan they'd acquired 200 miles back, trading the conspicuous government SUV for something that wouldn't trigger automated surveillance systems. Kevin sat in the back seat, still technically their captive, but increasingly aligned with their mission as the full dimensions of Ramirez's plans became clear. The fundraising event begins at 7. Thalia reported, consulting her tablet, private dinner for major donors to the Children's Education Initiative at the North Star Hotel. Elegant irony, using children's welfare to whitewash her involvement in Sarajevo. Eleanor remained focused on navigating the increasing traffic, her expression betraying nothing of the storm brewing beneath her composed exterior. What's our approach? Service entrance, Thalia replied. I have a contact and former agency support staff who owes me for Bucharest. She's working catering tonight and can get us access badges. We'll have approximately 90 minutes before Winters arrives to position ourselves. The plan was high risk with too many variables to control. Exactly the kind of operation the division had trained them to avoid when possible. But circumstances had eliminated cleaner options. Time was evaporating, and with each passing hour, Ramirez moved closer to implementing his terminal sanction against Hassan, with all the collateral damage that entailed. Any update from Marcus? Eleanor asked as they exited the freeway, following signs toward downtown. Thalia checked their secure communication channel. Team 2 has established observation of Hassan's compound. Minimal visible activity, but thermal imaging shows approximately 15 personnel inside the main structure and outbuildings. They've identified 3 vehicles capable of transporting significant payloads. Explosives. Eleanor interpreted. Hassan always preferred spectacular statements, especially when targeting symbolic venues, Thalia agreed grimly. As they navigated toward the hotel, Eleanor's satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message. She glanced at the display, a furrow appearing between her brows. It's from an unknown number. Could be Ramirez, Kevin suggested from the back seat. He has resources to track communication patterns, even if he can't precisely locate us. Eleanor nodded, then activated the speaker function, maintaining both hands on the wheel as she answered. Identify yourself. Hello, Phantom. Adam Ramirez's voice filled the car, the familiar timbre causing Eleanor's grip to tighten involuntarily on the steering wheel. Enjoying Minneapolis, I hear the restaurant scene has improved considerably in recent years. The implication was clear. He knew their location, their likely target. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Thalia, who immediately began running countermeasures on their electronic devices, checking for tracking vulnerabilities. What do you want? Adam. Eleanor asked, her voice neutral, despite the surge of adrenaline his call had triggered. To congratulate you on your initiative, he replied smoothly. You've behaved exactly as I hoped. Dividing your resources, seeking higher authority, trying to undermine my operation through political channels. If you're tracking us, you know we're close to exposing your unsanctioned plan. Eleanor countered. Director Winters won't authorize a domestic strike with civilian casualties. Ramirez's laugh was soft and without humor. Elizabeth sanctioned, Sarajevo Eleanor. 37 children. What makes you think American lives weigh more heavily on her conscience than foreign ones? Because this isn't about counterterrorism anymore, Eleanor replied, making a sharp turn onto a side street to break any possible physical surveillance. This is about eliminating loose ends. Hassan, me, my team. All evidence of calliope wrapped up in one convenient terrorist incident. That level of domestic collateral requires authorization beyond Winters. Sadakunum, a beat of silence followed, and when Ramirez spoke again, his tone had shifted subtly. You always were the most perceptive of my operatives. It's why I selected you for Sarajevo. I needed someone who could see the complete picture eventually. Someone who would understand the necessity. There was nothing necessary about using children as pawns. Eleanor said, her voice hard. Nothing necessary about lying to your own operative about the target. On the contrary, Ramirez countered, it was the only way to reveal Hassan's true nature. To force him out of the shadows, he sacrificed those children as shields, Eleanor. And now he's planning something far worse on American soil. Something that will make Sarajevo look like a training exercise. Eleanor navigated through downtown traffic, approaching the hotel from the direction opposite to their planned entry point, maintaining evasive driving patterns while continuing the conversation. If you know Hassan's plans, why not bring in official counterterrorism resources? Why the unofficial terminal sanction? Because official channels are compromised. Ramirez replied, an edge of genuine frustration entering his voice. Hassan has cultivated assets within the intelligence community, including at the highest levels. Any official operation would be detected and countered before it could be implemented. The implication hung heavily in the air, that Director Winters herself might be compromised either wittingly or unwittingly. Eleanor processed this claim with practiced skepticism. Ramirez had always excelled at sowing doubt and division to serve his purposes. Convenient explanation, she observed, but it doesn't justify what you're planning. I'm planning to stop a mass casualty attack, Ramirez insisted, by any means necessary, just as you once would have before Sarajevo broke your nerve. Eleanor's expression hardened, though Ramirez couldn't see it. My nerve is intact, Adam. It's my blind trust that's gone. We'll stop Hassan, but we'll do it without your acceptable losses. You have less time than you think, Ramirez replied, his tone shifting to one of finality. Hassan's team is mobilizing. Intel indicates movement toward their objective. Will begin within hours. What's the target? Eleanor demanded. That's the question, isn't it? Ramirez's voice carried a hint of something like regret. Find Hassan, and you'll have your answer. But don't expect Director Winters to be your salvation. Eleanor, there are larger forces at work than either of us fully comprehend. The call ended abruptly, leaving a tense silence in the vehicle. Eleanor immediately pulled into a parking garage, selecting a space near a support column that would provide maximum concealment from overhead surveillance. He's playing us, Thalia said quietly, still running checks on their devices. Trying to make us doubt Winters, to hesitate in approaching her, or telling a partial truth to serve his purposes? Eleanor countered, her tactical mind evaluating the new information from multiple angles. We proceed as planned, but with additional caution. Winters is still our best chance to stop the terminal sanction. Kevin leaned forward from the back seat. There's something else to consider, he said hesitantly. If Hassan truly has assets in intelligence circles, and if he's identified you as the Phantom, then he may be monitoring Director Winters as a potential connection to you. The observation was troublingly logical. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Thalia, both of them recalculating risks based on this perspective. We need to assume our approach to Winters will be under surveillance from multiple parties. Eleanor concluded. We adjust accordingly. They abandoned the vehicle in the parking garage, transitioning to foot movement, through a pre-planned route that utilized the downtown skyway system, the enclosed pedestrian bridges connecting buildings throughout Minneapolis's core. This approach minimized their exposure to external surveillance, while allowing them to approach the North Star Hotel from an unexpected direction. Thalia's contact met them at a service entrance to an adjacent building, providing the promised credentials and basic catering uniforms that would allow them access to the hotel's back corridors. The woman, small, efficient, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, asked no questions about their purpose, simply nodding to Thalia with the silent understanding that passed between professionals who recognize one another's world. As they prepared to separate and enter the hotel through different access points, Eleanor paused, placing a hand on Kevin's shoulder. "Last chance to reconsider your position," she said quietly. "Once we're inside, you're fully committed." The young operative met her gaze steadily. "I signed up to protect my country, not to facilitate domestic strikes against American citizens, regardless of the justification. I'm with you." Eleanor nodded, recognizing the same moral clarity she had once possessed before years of operational compromises had blurred the lines. Stay close to Thalia, follow her lead. They synchronized watches and communications, then separated, each taking their assigned route into the complex security apparatus surrounding the high-profile fundraising event. Eleanor moved with the confident efficiency of someone who belonged, her body language and expressions carefully calibrated to deflect attention. The Phantom's trademark invisibility in plain sight. Meanwhile, 500 miles west, Marcus led his team through the final approach to Hassan al-Zahawi's compound, a cluster of buildings nestled in a remote valley of the North Dakota Badlands. They had established observation from 3 separate positions, creating a triangulation that gave them comprehensive coverage of the property and its approaches. Movement at the north entrance. Dominic reported through their secure channel. 2 SUVs departing heavily loaded based on the suspension compression. Armed personnel visible through thermal. Confirmed. Rico added from his position. Vehicle signatures match known transport patterns for explosive materials. Low center of gravity, careful driving. Marcus adjusted his observation equipment, focusing on the main building, where thermal imaging revealed the greatest concentration of personnel. "They're mobilizing earlier than anticipated," he concluded grimly, preparing to move to their target location. The 3 veterans exchanged tense communications, each understanding the implications. Hassan's operation was accelerating, potentially in response to detected surveillance, or according to some predetermined timeline. Either way, the window for intervention was rapidly closing. Marcus made the difficult decision to alert Eleanor, despite the risk of compromising her approach to Director Winters. "Team 1, be advised," he transmitted through their secure channel. "Target assets are mobilizing. Operations appear to be commencing. Timeline has accelerated significantly." Back in Minneapolis, Eleanor received this transmission just as she successfully infiltrated the hotel's service areas, the message confirming her worst fears. Events were converging toward a flashpoint, with Hassan's attack and Ramirez's response both accelerating beyond their ability to intervene through conventional channels. She paused in a quiet corridor, using a service alcove for momentary concealment as she processed this development. Their original plan, to convince Director Winters to officially countermand Ramirez's terminal sanction while they developed a targeted approach to neutralizing Hassan, was rapidly becoming unviable. They needed a new strategy, one that addressed both threats simultaneously. A memory surfaced, Robert's voice during one of their late-night conversations about her past, about the weight she carried from operations like Sarajevo. "The problem with playing chess against people like Ramirez," he had observed, "is that they've already calculated 20 moves ahead. The only winning approach is to stop playing chess altogether, to change the game to something they haven't prepared for." Eleanor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly as a new approach crystallized. She activated her communication link to Thalia, who had successfully entered through a different access point and was positioning herself near the private dining room where Director Winters would soon arrive. "Change of plans," Eleanor said softly. "We're not here to convince Winters to stop Ramirez anymore." "Explain," Thalia replied tersely, understanding from Eleanor's tone that something fundamental had shifted. "We're going to use her to flush out Hassan's intelligence assets. Eleanor continued, draw them into the open where we can identify and neutralize them, then use that leverage against both Ramirez and Hassan. High risk, Thalia observed, though her tone conveyed not objection, but tactical assessment. Highest, Eleanor agreed, but it's the only play that addresses both threats simultaneously. As she outlined the new approach, Eleanor felt the familiar cold clarity of the phantom settling over her. The strategic calculating precision that had once made her the division's most valuable asset. But this time it served her own purpose, her own moral framework, not the compromised objectives of handlers with hidden agendas. Somewhere overhead, Director Elizabeth Winters was arriving for an evening of champagne and platitudes about children's welfare, unaware that she was about to become the central piece in a dangerous countermove against forces she herself had helped set in motion years ago in Sarajevo. Eleanor checked her weapon one final time, then moved with silent purpose through the service corridor heading toward her new objective. Not as Ramirez's instrument or Hassan's target, but as an independent force determined to prevent history from repeating its bloody pattern. The game was changing, and neither Ramirez nor Hassan had prepared for this particular opponent. Not the controlled asset they had once manipulated, but the woman who had emerged from the ashes of Sarajevo with both her skills and her humanity intact. The North Star Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into an elegant showcase of wealth and influence, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements, waitstaff in immaculate uniform circulating with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. Beneath the veneer of charitable concern, the event was fundamentally transactional. Political access and influence exchanged for generous donations to the Children's Education Initiative. Eleanor moved through this rarefied atmosphere with practiced invisibility, her catering uniform and deliberately forgettable demeanor, allowing her to navigate between Minneapolis's elite without drawing attention. She maintained a sector-by-sector surveillance pattern, identifying security personnel, noting exits and potential choke points, all while appearing to be simply distributing delicate canapes from a silver tray. Through her nearly imperceptible earpiece, Thalia provided ongoing situational updates. Winters has arrived currently in the reception foyer with the event organizers. 2 personal security detail, plus hotel security and event security. Estimated entry to main ballroom in 7 minutes. Eleanor acknowledged with a subtle finger tap against her tray, continuing her methodical assessment of the room. Their adjusted plan required precise timing and exceptional situational awareness, creating a controlled confrontation with Winters that would force any of Hassan's intelligence assets to reveal themselves through reaction or intervention. Movement at southeast entrance. Thalia continued. 2 individuals with intelligence community signatures, stance observation patterns, communication style, possible division or counterintelligence. Ramirez's people or Hassan's. Eleanor murmured, her lips barely moving, as she offered appetizers to a group of corporate executives near the bar. Uncertain. Thalia replied, but they're showing heightened interest in the security arrangements around Winters. Eleanor processed this information, recalculating timing and approach vectors. If these were Hassan's assets, their plan might work even better than anticipated. If they were Ramirez's, additional complications would arise. Kevin's position, she asked, moving toward the kitchen access doors to refresh her appetizer tray, using the opportunity to survey the room from a different angle. In position near the emergency exit corridor, Thalia confirmed, ready to implement containment if necessary. The young operative had proven increasingly valuable, his insider knowledge of Ramirez's protocols combining with a genuine moral compass that had led him to commit fully to their effort. Eleanor had recognized in him something of herself before Sarajevo, the idealistic professional who believed in the mission but maintained personal ethical boundaries. The quiet buzz of conversation in the ballroom subtly shifted as Director Elizabeth Winters finally made her entrance. A tall, striking woman in her early 60s, silver hair, swept into an elegant updo, her bearing projecting confidence and authority. Even in a floor-length evening gown rather than her usual professional attire, she carried the unmistakable presence of someone accustomed to making consequential decisions. Eleanor observed from near a support column, noting the practiced political smile, the efficient way Winters worked the room, brief but seemingly warm interactions with key donors, the perfect balance of approachability and authority. Nothing in the director's demeanor suggested awareness of events unfolding in North Dakota, of Ramirez's terminal sanction, or Hassan's imminent attack. Either she was completely uninformed, which seemed unlikely given her position, or she was an exceptional actress, a quality Eleanor knew to be essential in the upper echelons of intelligence leadership. Director's security detail has established standard protective formation. Thalia noted through the earpiece, two primary angles covered with event security handling perimeter vulnerability exist during her scheduled remarks at the podium in approximately 20 minutes. Eleanor acknowledged continuing her circuit of the room while maintaining visual contact with Winters. Their plan required intercepting the director in a location that balanced privacy with emergency access, controlled enough for a meaningful exchange, but with escape routes if the situation deteriorated. Her satellite phone vibrated in her pocket, a text message rather than a call. Eleanor discreetly checked the display while appearing to adjust her uniform. From Marcus Target Convoy departed compound, 17 minutes ago heading east. 6 vehicles, heavily loaded, sat imagery tracking, request instructions. The timeline was accelerating beyond their worst projections. Hassan's operation was already in motion, which meant Ramirez's terminal sanction couldn't be far behind. They were running out of options in time. Eleanor made her decision abandoning the original intercept plan for a more direct approach. She set down her tray at a service station and moved purposefully toward the ladies' restroom, where Winters would almost certainly make a brief appearance during the evening. The gambit was risky. Security teams were trained to be particularly vigilant during principal's movements to and from such locations. But circumstances no longer allowed for perfect solutions. She positioned herself in an alcove near the restroom entrance, adjusting her uniform to partially conceal her features from the nearest security camera while maintaining sight lines to the main ballroom. The wait was brief. Within minutes, Director Winters broke away from a conversation with donors, nodded discreetly to her female security detail, and moved toward the restroom corridor. The security agent entered, first conducting a brief sweep before assuming a position outside the door. Winters followed, disappearing into the restroom alone, the one predictable moment of privacy in her carefully managed public appearance. Eleanor moved with fluid confidence, approaching the female agent with the bearing of hotel staff. "Excuse me, there's an urgent call for the director at the management office. Something about a security concern with the event." The agent's expression remained professionally neutral, but Eleanor detected the subtle shift in posture, the slight tensing that indicated heightened alertness. The director isn't taking calls during the event. Any messages can be relayed through proper channels. "Of course," Eleanor replied smoothly. However, the caller specifically mentioned Calliope and indicated it couldn't wait. "I'm just delivering the message as instructed." The code name landed precisely as intended. The agent's eyes widened, almost imperceptibly, hand moving instinctively toward her concealed communication device. "Wait here," she instructed, backing toward the restroom door while maintaining visual contact with Eleanor. In that moment of divided attention, Eleanor implemented the next phase, a precise strike to a nerve cluster at the base of the neck, delivered with such control that the agent lost consciousness without making a sound. Eleanor caught her before she could fall, guiding her gently to a seated position in the alcove, positioned to appear as though she were merely checking her phone while waiting. Without hesitation, Eleanor entered the restroom, securing the door behind her, with a maintenance sign she'd acquired earlier. Director Winters stood at the sink, washing her hands, and looked up with mild surprise at the intrusion, an expression that transformed into shock as recognition dawned. "Hello, Elizabeth," Eleanor said quietly. "It's been a long time." Winters froze, water still running over her hands. "Eleanor Hayes," she breathed, using the name Eleanor had abandoned 15 years earlier. "You're supposed to be dead. A convenient fiction," Eleanor replied, maintaining a non-threatening posture while blocking the exit. "One that suited both of us until recently." To her credit, Winters recovered her composure quickly, shutting off the water and reaching for a towel with deliberate calm. "I assume this isn't a social call after 15 years of silence." "Mushroom, so Calliope has been reactivated," Eleanor stated without preamble. "Ramirez is preparing to implement a terminal sanction on American soil against Hassan al-Zahawi. Hassan himself is currently leading a convoy toward an unknown target, presumably for a mass casualty attack. Winters' expression revealed nothing, her years of intelligence leadership having perfected her ability to conceal reactions. If Ramirez has operational authority for counterterrorism activities, he doesn't answer to me. The division maintains independent action protocols. We both know that's not true. Eleanor countered. A domestic terminal sanction requires oversight, authorization at your level or higher, especially one designed to eliminate both a terrorist threat and former assets with knowledge of Sarajevo. A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, or calculation, crossed Winters' features. Sarajevo was a regrettable intelligence failure. Nothing more. Stop lying, Eleanor said, her voice hardening. I know the truth. The school was deliberately targeted. The children were calculated collateral damage. I was being tested as much as Hassan was being hunted. Winters studied her for a long moment, seeming to evaluate options and outcomes before responding. What do you want from me? Eleanor, confession, absolution? Neither of us can change what happened. I want you to stop Ramirez before he creates another Sarajevo here. American children this time. American families, all to eliminate Hassan and tie up loose ends from an operation that should never have been approved in the first place. Something shifted in Winters' expression. A subtle change that Eleanor, with her training in human micro-expressions, recognized as genuine concern rather than political calculation. Ramirez doesn't have authorization for a terminal sanction, she said carefully. If he's proceeding with such an operation, he's doing so without proper oversight. Then stop him. Eleanor pressed, you have the authority. One call. Winters shook her head slightly. It's not that simple. Ramirez has cultivated independent channels over the years, direct lines to certain military and intelligence assets that bypass normal command structures. It was useful during certain sensitive operations. Like Sarajevo, Eleanor supplied, yes. The single word carried the weight of admission. Winters had avoided moments earlier. A tense silence fell between them. The operative who had pulled the trigger and the administrator who had authorized the mission bound by actions neither could undo. Hassan has to be stopped. Winters finally said, his network has been planning this attack for years. The intelligence is solid. Mass casualties, symbolic target, maximum psychological impact. I'm not suggesting we allow Hassan to proceed, Eleanor clarified. I'm suggesting we stop both threats without creating another generation of victims like those children in Sarajevo. Winters studied her with new intensity. You have a plan. I do, but I need to know something first. Eleanor stepped closer, her voice dropping to ensure even surveillance equipment wouldn't capture her next words. Is there a connection between you and Hassan? Has he compromised you in some way? The director's eyes widened with genuine surprise. What? No. Why would you? Ramirez claims Hassan has assets in intelligence leadership. Eleanor explained that official channels are compromised. It's his justification for the unofficial operation. Understanding dawned on Winters' face. Classic Ramirez misdirection. Creating doubt among potential allies, isolating himself as the only trustworthy authority. She shook her head. I'm not compromised, Eleanor. But Ramirez isn't wrong about everything. Hassan does have intelligence assets, just not at my level. We're mid-level analysts in counterterrorism divisions, data specialists who can redirect resources, delay responses, create blind spots. We've identified 3 but suspect more. Puna, this aligned with Eleanor's assessment. Hassan had always preferred operational infiltration over leadership compromise, finding it more sustainable and less detectable. Here's what happens next. Eleanor said, decision crystallizing. You return to the event as if nothing has occurred. When you reach the podium for your scheduled remarks, you'll receive an urgent communication requiring your immediate departure. Your security detail will escort you to a vehicle waiting at the North Service entrance. And then we prevent a massacre and hold accountable those responsible for Sarajevo, both Hassan and the division. Winters considered this for a long moment. You're asking me to trust you completely after 15 years of separation under less than amicable circumstances? I'm asking you to make a different choice than you made in Sarajevo. Eleanor replied quietly, to place innocent lives above operational expedience. Something in Winters seemed to settle at these words, a resolution or perhaps a reckoning long delayed. Very well, but know this, Eleanor. Stopping Ramirez's operation will have consequences beyond what you can anticipate. There are layers to Calliope that even I was not fully briefed on. I'm counting on it. Eleanor replied, the truth needs to surface, Elizabeth, all of it. As they finalized the details of their improvised extraction plan, neither woman noticed the small device affixed beneath the bathroom sink. A miniature surveillance transmitter capturing every word of their exchange, feeding the conversation to listeners with their own agenda and timeline. Outside the North Star Hotel, a nondescript van received this transmission, its occupants exchanging grim looks as they listened to the former Phantom and the Director of National Intelligence conspire to derail both Ramirez's sanction and Hassan's attack. One man reached for a secure phone, dialing a number few had access to Falcon. He reported tersely when the connection established. The asset is compromised. Phantom has made contact and turned her. Proceeding to contingency protocol. The response was brief, the instruction clear. The man ended the call and turned to his colleagues. We move now. Priority is eliminating Phantom, and extracting the director. Hassan's team will handle the rest. The revelation that had eluded Eleanor in her planning now became apparent through this exchange. Some of the assets she had identified as Ramirez's were actually Hassan's, operating under deep cover within American intelligence structures. The coming confrontation would not be the controlled scenario she had envisioned, but something far more chaotic and deadly. Inside the hotel, Eleanor exited the restroom, first confirming that Winters's unconscious security detail remained undiscovered in the alcove. The director followed moments later, smoothly rejoining the event as if nothing unusual had occurred, a lifetime of intelligence work evident in her seamless return to the political performance. Eleanor activated her communication link to Thalia. Package secured, but complications arising. Hassan's assets are more embedded than we assessed. Possible compromise of our communication channels? Understood, Thalia replied tersely. Shifting to contingency protocols, Kevin reports unusual movement at security checkpoints. Multiple new personnel arriving without standard credential verification. The net was tightening around them faster than Eleanor had anticipated. She moved quickly through service corridors, abandoning her catering disguise for more practical attire she'd concealed in a maintenance closet earlier. Dark clothing that wouldn't restrict movement during the confrontation she now recognized as inevitable. As she prepared for extraction, her satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message from Marcus. Convoy has changed direction. Now heading NW on Highway 94. Analysis suggests Minneapolis as likely destination. The pieces aligned with terrible clarity. Hassan wasn't targeting some random symbolic location. He was targeting the fundraising event itself with its concentration of political, financial, and intelligence leadership. And based on the movement of his assets within the hotel, he had inside information on both security arrangements and Eleanor's presence. They had walked into a trap set not by Ramirez, but by Hassan himself. 15 years of planning culminating in a perfect convergence, eliminating the Phantom key intelligence leadership and creating the mass casualty event he had always specialized in. Eleanor had mere minutes to adapt to this revelation, to formulate a response that might still prevent catastrophe. She activated her communication link one final time. All units be advised. She transmitted abandoning protocol for clarity in the critical moment. Hassan's target is the North Star Hotel current location. His convoy is inbound, estimated arrival 45 minutes. Multiple assets already in place within the security perimeter. Mission parameters have shifted from extraction to evacuation and interdiction. Thalia's response was immediate. Acknowledged, initiating emergency protocols. As Eleanor moved toward the ballroom where hundreds of influential Americans remained blissfully unaware of the danger converging upon them, she felt the weight of responsibility more acutely than at any moment since Sarajevo. Once again, she stood at the nexus of terrible forces, her decisions carrying life or death consequences for innocent bystanders. But unlike Sarajevo, she now moved with full awareness, acting according to her own moral compass, rather than manipulated directives. Whatever happened in the coming hour, the blood would not be on her hands through deception or manipulation. She moved as her authentic self, neither entirely Eleanor Blackwood the rancher, nor entirely the phantom, the operative, but the integrated whole Robert had always believed she could become. The final confrontation was approaching, and with it the reckoning for Sarajevo that had been 15 years in the making. The North Star Hotel ballroom hummed with the practiced rhythm of high society functions, the clink of crystal polite laughter, the subtle dance of influence and access, playing out beneath chandeliers that cast everything in flattering golden light. On the small stage, director Elizabeth Winters approached the podium to deliver her keynote address, her composure betraying nothing of her recent encounter with Eleanor. From a service position near the east wall, Eleanor maintained surveillance of the room, having exchanged her distinctive catering uniform for the standardized black attire of hotel security, a disguise that offered both better mobility and valid reason to be vigilant. Through her earpiece, she monitored Thalia's ongoing assessment of the deteriorating situation. Hassan's assets are moving into position. Thalia reported tensely. I count at least 5 individuals displaying non-standard tactical movements. They've compromised the hotel security systems. Cameras in the West Corridor are on loop playback. Eleanor acknowledged with a subtle tap on her communication device, continuing her scan of the ballroom. While processing the implications, Hassan's people were establishing control of the environment, preparing for the arrival of their main force. The hotel's hundreds of guests, including many of the country's political and financial elite, remained oblivious to the noose tightening around them. At the podium, Winters began her address with practiced charm, speaking about the importance of educational opportunities for underprivileged children. The irony was not lost on Eleanor. This woman who had authorized the Sarajevo operation, now championing the welfare of children, perhaps seeking redemption through philanthropy for decisions made in classified briefing rooms, multiple vehicles approaching from the service entrance. Kevin's voice came through the communication channel, tension evident in his usual professional tone. Tactical formation, security overrides in use, estimated breach of perimeter in 3 minutes. Eleanor made her decision, abandoning the original extraction plan for a more urgent evacuation strategy. She moved swiftly to a fire alarm positioned near the kitchen entrance and activated it without hesitation. The shrill alarm cut through the elegant atmosphere like a knife, conversations halting mid-sentence as confusion rippled through the crowd. On stage, Winters paused her speech, her eyes finding Eleanor's across the room. A moment of silent communication between two professionals who understood the signal's meaning. The director smoothly transitioned from confusion to authoritative action. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice carrying over the alarm. Hotel security has informed me we need to evacuate immediately. Please proceed to the nearest exits in an orderly fashion. This is not a drill. The practiced crisis response training of the hotel staff engaged immediately personnel moving to exit points to direct guests while maintaining calm. Eleanor noted with professional appreciation how Winters' security detail closed ranks around her, forming a protective formation as they began guiding her toward the nearest secure exit. But Eleanor also observed what the security team didn't: the subtle repositioning of Hassan's assets throughout the room, their movements suggesting a coordinated effort to control specific exit points. They were funneling the evacuation, creating choke points where the arriving convoy could implement whatever attack Hassan had planned. They're not trying to stop the evacuation, she transmitted to her team. They're channeling it. Whatever Hassan has planned, he wants these people outside the building, not inside. Bomb in the convoy, Thalia suggested, the grim possibility hanging between them. Or something worse, Eleanor replied, moving against the flow of evacuating guests toward Winters and her security detail. The crowd's initially ordered evacuation was deteriorating into barely contained panic, the primal fear of confined spaces during emergencies overriding social conditioning. Eleanor navigated through this human current with practiced efficiency, reaching Winters' group just as they approached a service corridor that would lead to a supposed secure extraction point. Stop, Eleanor commanded, interposing herself between the director and the corridor. That route is compromised. Winters' lead security agent, a stocky man with the hyper-vigilant eyes of someone with military background, moved his hand instinctively toward his concealed weapon, Stand down. He ordered, we have extraction protocols in place. Your protocols have been compromised, Eleanor countered, addressing Winters directly. Hassan's people are controlling the evacuation routes. They want you outside, recognition flashed in Winters' eyes. Not just of the tactical situation, but of the larger implications. If Hassan had infiltrated her security detail or extraction protocols, the compromise went deeper than anyone had realized. Adams, she addressed her lead agent. Change of plans. We move to alternative exit. See, the agent hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his features. Ma'am, standard procedure for this threat level is compromised. Winters cut him off with authority that brooked no argument. Alternative exit. See now. Eleanor noted the moment of tension, the fractional delay in the agent's compliance that confirmed her suspicions. This man was either directly compromised or following protocols that had been subtly manipulated by Hassan's assets. Either way, he couldn't be trusted. This way, Eleanor stated, taking the lead without waiting for further discussion. She guided them toward a kitchen access point that would connect to maintenance corridors Thalia had identified earlier as less monitored than main passages. Behind them, the ballroom had nearly emptied guests streaming toward main exits, where Eleanor now understood they would be vulnerable to whatever attack Hassan had planned. The fire alarm continued its piercing wail, covering the sounds of their movement through the back corridors of the hotel. Multiple breach points confirmed. Thalia reported through the communication channel. Hassan's convoy has arrived at the service entrance. Heavily armed personnel deploying using hotel service uniforms as cover. Eleanor processed this information while leading Winters and her reluctant security detail through the labyrinthine back passages of the hotel. The operation was unfolding with the precision and coordination that had always been Hassan's trademark. Multiple vectors of attack converging on a single target, layers of deception and infiltration, creating confusion among defenders. Asset in your security detail, she said quietly to Winters as they moved. The lead agent hesitated when you changed extraction routes. Winters' expression hardened. Adams has been with me for 3 years. Highest clearance, impeccable record. The best assets always are. Eleanor replied, we need to separate from them. Now, the director's eyes narrowed, evaluating options and risks with the calculating efficiency that had elevated her to the highest levels of intelligence leadership. Then she gave a single decisive nod. At the next junction in the corridor, Eleanor made her move, a sudden turn into a linen storage area, pulling Winters with her, while using a service cart to momentarily block pursuit. The director's security detail reacted with professional alacrity, but the narrow corridor and unexpected obstacle created precious seconds of advantage. Adams Winters called out, maintaining the appearance of confusion rather than intentional evasion. We'll circle back through the North Passage, maintain communication channels. Eleanor secured the storage room door with a laundry cart, knowing it would provide only momentary delay against trained security personnel. This way, she directed moving toward a staff access point she had identified during her earlier reconnaissance, my security detail. Winters began, is either compromised or following compromised protocols. Eleanor finished firmly, we assume hostile intent until proven otherwise. They moved swiftly through employee passages, Eleanor maintaining communication with Thalia, who guided them based on security camera feeds she had accessed through the hotel's systems. Hassan's team is implementing a coordinated sweep. Thalia reported multiple 3-person units, tactical formation. They're searching methodically, prioritizing extraction routes and secure areas. Hunting the director specifically, Eleanor asked as they descended a service stairwell. Negative search patterns suggest they're looking for multiple targets, VIPs maybe, or something else entirely. The implication was troubling. Hassan wasn't just targeting Winters as the symbol of American intelligence leadership. He had multiple objectives within the building, a larger plan than mere assassination. As they reached the basement level, Eleanor's satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message from Marcus. She checked it while maintaining security on the stairwell exit. Terminal sanction authorization detected on military channels. Drone assets repositioning. Estimated deployment 17 minutes. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Ramirez hadn't been working against Hassan. He had been anticipating him, The terminal sanction wasn't meant to prevent Hassan's attack, but to respond to it, eliminating both the terrorist leader and inconvenient witnesses like Eleanor in one justifiable strike. Winters. Eleanor said, her voice taking on new urgency. Ramirez has received authorization for the terminal sanction. This entire hotel is about to become a target for precision munitions, with everyone inside designated as acceptable collateral damage. The director's composure cracked, for the first time, genuine shock registering on her features. That's impossible. Such authorization requires presidential approval for domestic targets. Unless the target has been redesignated as a terrorist stronghold in an active attack scenario, Eleanor countered, which is exactly what Hassan is creating right now. The hotel, the VIPs inside the panic. It's all theater to justify the response. Understanding dawned in Winter's eyes. The terrible elegance of the trap they had walked into. Hassan creates the crisis, Ramirez implements the solution, and all inconvenient connections to Sarajevo and Calliope are eliminated in what would be recorded as a tragic but necessary counterterrorism operation. We need to clear the building completely. Winters said, decision crystallizing. Then secure evidence of this conspiracy before Ramirez can implement the strike. Eleanor nodded, already formulating a multi-phase response. Thalia can trigger the hotel's emergency protocols, sprinklers, all alarms, complete evacuation indicators, that will force even those who ignored the initial alarm to exit. She activated her communication link. Thalia, implement maximum evacuation protocols. Kevin, rendezvous at extraction point, Bravo. We need to get the director to a secure location where she can countermand the terminal sanction. As Thalia acknowledged and began executing the evacuation escalation, Eleanor led Winters through the basement corridor toward a service exit that would allow them to bypass the perimeter Hassan's people had established above. The path took them past mechanical rooms and storage areas, the institutional backdrop of luxury so different from the elegant spaces above. They had nearly reached the exit when a figure stepped from an adjoining corridor, blocking their path. The man, tall Middle Eastern features, with the coiled tension of a trained operative, raised a suppressed pistol with practiced steadiness. The Phantom, he said, his accent reflecting education in European institutions, rather than the harsh cadences Eleanor associated with Hassan's earlier followers. And the Director of National Intelligence? My employer will be pleased. Eleanor pushed Winters behind her, adopting a non-threatening posture, while calculating distances and reaction times. Your employer has been manipulated, she replied calmly. This entire operation serves Ramirez's purposes, not Hassan's. A flicker of something, curiosity perhaps, or uncertainty, crossed the man's features. An interesting claim from someone who killed 37 children in Sarajevo. The accusation landed like a physical blow, but Eleanor maintained her composure. I pulled the trigger, she acknowledged, but the real target was always Hassan, forcing him into the open by creating an unforgivable atrocity he would need to avenge Ramirez and American intelligence, used those children as bait, knowing Hassan would never let such an attack go unanswered. She's telling the truth, Winters added from behind Eleanor. I authorized the operation based on manipulated intelligence. We've been used as weapons against each other for 15 years. The man's eyes narrowed, weapon remaining steady despite the potentially destabilizing information. Even if this is true, it changes nothing. Hassan al-Zahawi has waited 15 years for this moment. The Phantom must answer for Sarajevo. And she will, Winters replied before Eleanor could speak. But not through more innocent deaths. Ramirez has authorized a drone strike on this building once Hassan's presence is confirmed. Everyone inside, your team, the remaining civilians, all of us, becomes acceptable collateral damage, while both Hassan and the truth about Sarajevo are buried forever. Uncertainty now clearly registered in the operative's expression, the calculation of a professional reassessing mission parameters based on new intelligence. Eleanor recognized the moment, having experienced similar revelations during her own operational career. Verify it, she suggested quietly. Check the military channels your team monitors. You'll find preparations for a precision strike on these coordinates. The man hesitated, then reached for a communication device with his free hand, maintaining the weapon's aim with unwavering focus. After a brief exchange in Arabic, too quick for Eleanor to fully follow his expression, hardened with new resolve, but directed at a different target. "It appears our mutual enemy is more duplicitous than anticipated," he said, lowering his weapon slightly, though not completely. "Hassan should be informed of this development. We need to clear the building first. Eleanor pressed hundreds of civilians remain at risk." The operative considered this, then nodded once. "My team can accelerate the evacuation, but the Phantom comes with me afterward. Hassan has waited 15 years for this meeting." Eleanor exchanged a glance with Winters, a silent communication passing between them. The director gave an almost imperceptible nod. Understanding that Eleanor had already made her decision, agreed. Eleanor stated, "I'll meet with Hassan once the building is cleared and the terminal sanction is countermanded, but the director leaves now to ensure she can officially stop Ramirez's attack." The operative studied her face, searching for deception and finding none. "Very well. The director may proceed to the service exit. My colleagues will ensure her safe passage to a secure location." He activated his communication device, issuing rapid instructions. In Arabic, Winters turned to Eleanor, genuine concern evident in her expression. "You don't have to do this. We can find another way." "There is no other way," Eleanor replied quietly. "This ends today. All of it. Sarajevo Calliope. The lies. Go stop Ramirez. I'll handle Hassan." As Winters departed with two of Hassan's operatives who had appeared at the operative's summons, Eleanor faced the man who now held her future in his hands. "Your name?" she asked simply. "Tariq," he replied after a moment's consideration. "I was 12 years old in Sarajevo. My cousin attended the school you targeted." The personal connection struck Eleanor with unexpected force. This wasn't just another of Hassan's followers. This was someone with direct connection to her most terrible action, someone for whom the mission was deeply personal. "I'm sorry," she said, the words inadequate but necessary. "I didn't know it was a school, but my ignorance doesn't diminish the harm." Tariq's expression remained unreadable. "Apologies mean nothing. 15 years later. Come, Hassan is waiting." As they moved through the rapidly emptying hotel emergency systems, blaring at maximum intensity, to drive out even the most reluctant evacuees, Eleanor maintained communication with her team through carefully concealed signals. Talia confirmed that Winters had successfully reached a secure location and was implementing the countermand against Ramirez's terminal sanction. Marcus and his team had repositioned to provide observation of Hassan's convoy and possible intervention options. The pieces were in motion for the final confrontation. Not the one Ramirez had planned or Hassan had anticipated, but one Eleanor had shaped through the revelation of truth and the leverage of mutual enemies. The Phantom moved toward her reckoning, not as a weapon deployed by handlers, but as a woman determined to end a cycle of violence that had begun with her finger on a trigger 15 years earlier in Sarajevo. Whatever happened in the coming hour, Eleanor knew with cold certainty that not everyone would survive the convergence of forces set in motion by buried truths finally exposed to light. The ballroom that had earlier hosted Minneapolis's elite now stood eerily vacant. Abandoned champagne flutes on linen-covered tables, chairs hastily pushed aside during the evacuation, creating a chaotic landscape. Emergency lights cast harsh, blue-white illumination across the spacewater from the triggered sprinkler system pooling on the marble floor, reflecting fractured images like a shattered mirror. In the center of this desolation stood Hassan al-Zahawi. He was not as Eleanor remembered him from intelligence briefings 15 years earlier. The firebrand revolutionary had been replaced by a figure of austere dignity. A tall man in his 60s, silver-streaked beard, neatly trimmed, his bearing more scholarly than militant. Only his eyes remained unchanged, intense, evaluating, revealing an intellect that had always made him more dangerous than mere zealots. Eleanor approached under Tariq's watchful escort, absorbing details with the automatic assessment that had been drilled into her through years of operational training. 6 other operatives positioned throughout the ballroom, maintaining both security perimeter and direct coverage of their leader. 2 visible exits, both controlled, the rain of water from sprinklers gradually diminishing as systems cycled down, creating an almost theatrical mist between her and her longtime adversary. The phantom herself, Hassan observed, his accented English precise and cultured, finally emerged from the shadows. Eleanor stopped at a distance that balanced respectful communication with tactical positioning. Hassan, you know, he continued as if they were engaged in casual conversation rather than a potentially lethal confrontation. Intelligence agencies worldwide spent millions trying to identify you after Sarajevo. The invisible sniper, the operative without a face. He studied her with clinical interest. Yet here you are, a woman approaching her senior years, unremarkable except for the way you carry yourself. That distinctive combination of awareness and readiness that never quite disappears, no matter how long the retirement. I'm not here to discuss my biography, Eleanor replied evenly. Hassan smiled, a small controlled expression devoid of warmth. No, you're here because circumstances have forced us into this conversation 15 years after it should have occurred. Because Adam Ramirez has finally overplayed his hand. The mention of Ramirez confirmed what Eleanor had begun to suspect, that Hassan's understanding of the situation might be more nuanced than she had initially assumed. You know about the terminal sanction, she stated rather than asked, of course. Hassan gestured to one of his operatives who approached with a tablet displaying surveillance imagery of military drone preparations. My organization maintains awareness of certain American military channels. Ramirez's authorization appeared approximately 27 minutes ago. A precision strike on these coordinates timed to coincide with confirmation of my presence, along with hundreds of civilian casualties that would be blamed on your attack. Eleanor added. Hassan inclined his head in acknowledgement. A familiar pattern, much like Sarajevo, where children became expendable pawns in a larger game. His eyes hardened. 37 children died because Ramirez needed to flush me into the open, using an atrocity so heinous I would be compelled to respond, using you as his weapon while keeping you ignorant of the true target. The assessment aligned too perfectly with what Eleanor had learned in recent days to be coincidence. You've known this all along, she realized aloud, that Sarajevo wasn't an intelligence failure, but a calculated decision. I suspected immediately. Hassan confirmed it within a year through sources within European intelligence circles. Ramirez sacrificed those children to provoke a response from me, to force my network into visibility when more conventional methods had failed. Eleanor absorbed this with outward calm despite the internal turmoil it created. Another layer of manipulation in an operation that had defined and destroyed her life. And yet you still blame me, she observed. Targeted me specifically, even knowing I was deceived about the nature of the target. You pulled the trigger, Hassan replied, his voice taking on an edge for the first time. Deceived or not, you were the instrument of their deaths. Responsibility cannot be so easily abdicated. The accusation struck with precision because it aligned with Eleanor's own unresolved guilt. The knowledge that regardless of deception, her finger had applied pressure to the trigger. Her skill had ensured the devastating impact. She had spent 15 years on the ranch trying to atone for an action that perhaps could never be truly absolved. I live with that knowledge every day, she acknowledged quietly. But this, she gestured to the evacuated ballroom, the evidence of the operation Hassan had planned, would only continue the cycle. More innocent deaths, more retribution, more justification for people like Ramirez to expand their power through fear. Hassan studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Tell me, Phantom, what would justice for Sarajevo look like to you? Not absolution, justice. And the question caught Eleanor by surprise. Not the confrontational accusation she had expected, but a genuine philosophical inquiry that suggested Hassan's motivations might be more complex than simple revenge. Truth, she answered after careful consideration. Full disclosure of who authorized the operation, who knew about the children, who calculated their deaths as acceptable losses. Accountability for those decisions at the highest levels, not just for those who implemented them. Sarhan, an interesting answer. Hassan observed, not personal survival or forgiveness, but institutional accountability. Eleanor met his gaze directly. The children of Sarajevo deserve nothing less. but that accountability won't come through more violence. It comes through exposure, through testimony, through evidence that can't be denied or buried. Evidence like this: Hassan removed a small storage device from his pocket. 15 years of intelligence gathering documentation of Calliope from its inception, communication records between Ramirez, Winters, and others explicitly discussing the use of civilian targets to manipulate both you and me. The complete architecture of deception that led to Sarajevo and beyond. Eleanor's operational instincts immediately assessed the potential value of such documentation. The leverage it would provide, the accountability it could force if verified and properly disseminated. That's what this operation was really about. She realized aloud. Not just revenge against me or a symbolic attack. You were planning to release this information while demonstrating American vulnerability, maximum impact on multiple levels. Hassan inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the accuracy of her assessment. The attack was designed to ensure the information couldn't be suppressed or discredited. Fear creates attention. Attention ensures exposure. At the cost of how many innocent lives? Eleanor challenged. Fewer than will die if operations like Calliope continue unchecked. Hassan countered. Fewer than the children who will be sacrificed tomorrow and the day after by men like Ramirez who view collateral damage as a tool rather than a tragedy. The ethical impasse hung between them. Two people shaped by the same devastating event, arriving at different conclusions about how to prevent its repetition. In another context, in another life, Eleanor might have recognized in Hassan a mind not dissimilar to her own. Strategic, calculating, driven by principles rather than mere emotion. But their paths had diverged at Sarajevo, and the blood of 37 children had forever placed them on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. Director Winters has countermanded Ramirez's terminal sanction. Eleanor said after a moment, changing direction. She's prepared to testify regarding her role in Sarajevo and provide documentation of Calliope's unauthorized continuation. The truth will emerge without the need for further bloodshed. She needed while Winters cannot be trusted. Hassan dismissed. She authorized Sarajevo. She calculated those deaths as acceptable. Her testimony would be self-serving, minimizing her own culpability while offering sacrificial scapegoats. Perhaps, Eleanor acknowledged, but with your documentation and my testimony, the full truth becomes unavoidable. A three-sided account that can't be dismissed as either terrorist propaganda or a disgruntled operative's vendetta. Hassan's expression suggested skeptical consideration rather than outright rejection. The calculation of a strategist evaluating an unexpected alternative. Before he could respond, one of his operatives approached, rapidly speaking in urgent Arabic. Hassan's face hardened as he listened, then turned back to Eleanor. It seems we have a new complication, he informed her with cold precision. Despite Director Winters' counterman, Ramirez has proceeded with deployment of the terminal sanction impact in approximately 12 minutes. Eleanor felt a cold certainty settle over her. Ramirez had anticipated the counterman had prepared alternatives that bypassed normal authorization channels. The shadow networks Winters had mentioned, the direct lines to military assets cultivated over years of gray operations. We need to clear the building, she stated immediately. Your people, my team. My people are already evacuating, Hassan interrupted. The question is, what will you do with this? He held up the storage device containing the Calliope documentation. 12 minutes is insufficient time to transmit this volume of encrypted data to secure locations. Someone must physically carry it out. Sonanation. The choice crystallized with terrible clarity. Eleanor could escape with the evidence, ensuring the truth about Sarajevo would finally emerge, or she could remain to ensure Hassan himself didn't escape, finally completing the mission she had been given 15 years earlier. Professional training and personal redemption pulled in opposite directions. The Phantom would complete the mission regardless of personal cost. Eleanor Blackwood would choose truth and justice over vengeance. Give me the device, she said, extending her hand. I'll ensure the information reaches the right people. People who can't be silenced or bought. Hassan studied her with penetrating intensity, searching for deception or ulterior motive. And why would I trust the Phantom with the evidence that condemns her former masters? Because you're not dealing with the Phantom anymore? Eleanor replied steadily. She died 15 years ago in Sarajevo. You're dealing with Eleanor Blackwood, who has as much reason to want the truth exposed as you do. For several long seconds, the standoff continued. Two adversaries linked by tragedy, each calculating the other's true intentions. Then, with deliberate movements, Hassan placed the storage device in Eleanor's outstretched hand. Tariq will accompany you. He stated his tone, making clear this was non-negotiable, to ensure the information reaches its intended destination. Eleanor accepted this condition with a nod, recognizing it as reasonable caution rather than distrust. "And you are? I have other arrangements," Hassan replied enigmatically. "Our paths diverge here. Phantom, what happens next will determine whether Sarajevo remains buried or finally receives the reckoning it deserves." As Eleanor and Tariq moved swiftly toward an exit, she activated her communication link to Thalia. Status on the terminal sanction. Confirmed launch impact in 10 minutes. Thalia replied, tension evident in her usually controlled voice. "Marcus and Rico are implementing countermeasures, but success probability is low. Where are you?" "Heading out now with the evidence." Eleanor reported, "Hassan is still inside. His people are evacuating, and Ramirez, unknown." Eleanor admitted, "But his operation is proceeding despite Winters's countermand. He's gone completely rogue." They reached a service exit, Tariq leading the way through back corridors with the practiced efficiency of someone who had thoroughly studied the building's layout. Eleanor maintained constant awareness of their surroundings, alert for any sign of Ramirez's operatives who might be monitoring evacuation routes. Through the communication link, Marcus provided ongoing updates of their desperate efforts to disrupt the incoming strike. Electronic countermeasures, attempts to access military override channels, alerts to local emergency services. The grim probability of failure hung over each report, the realization that Ramirez had planned too thoroughly for conventional intervention to succeed. As they emerged into the cool night air, at a service entrance far from the main evacuation points, Eleanor made a decision that contradicted every professional instinct she had developed during her years with the division. "Tariq," she said, pressing the storage device firmly into his hand. "Take this to the rendezvous point Thalia will provide. Ensure it reaches both media outlets and secure servers." The operative's expression reflected confusion and suspicion. "You're not coming. I need to go back in," Eleanor replied, already calculating timing and approach vectors. "There's one more person who needs to be evacuated." "Hassan has his own escape plan," Tariq objected. "He doesn't need your assistance." "It's not about assistance," Eleanor countered. "It's about ensuring he actually leaves, that the evidence can be corroborated by testimony." Understanding dawned in Tariq's eyes. The recognition that Eleanor was choosing to risk her life not to eliminate Hassan as the Phantom would have done, but to preserve him as a living witness to the truth. It represented a fundamental reversal of everything the division had trained her to prioritize. Mission completion above survival, target elimination above evidence preservation. After a moment's hesitation, Tariq nodded. 7 minutes until impact. Don't waste them." Eleanor was already moving, re-entering the hotel through the service door and navigating rapidly through empty corridors toward the ballroom where she had left Hassan. Her communication link provided constant updates. Marcus and Rico's increasingly desperate efforts to disrupt the strike, Thalia's coordination of evacuation perimeters, Kevin's successful extraction of Director Winters to a secure location. The hotel stood eerily vacant, emergency lighting, casting harsh shadows across spaces designed for comfort and luxury. Water from the sprinkler system pooled on marble floors, creating treacherous footing that Eleanor navigated with practiced care. The distant wail of sirens suggested emergency services were responding to the evacuation, though they remained unaware of the true threat converging on the building. She reached the ballroom to find it apparently empty. Hassan and his remaining operatives gone, leaving only the detritus of the abandoned fundraiser and the emergency evacuation. Eleanor scanned the space with tactical precision, seeking any indication of which exit Hassan might have used or whether he remained hidden in the vast hotel complex. "Hassan," she called, abandoning stealth for urgency. 5 minutes to impact. You need to clear the building now." Haha. No response came, only the echo of her voice against marble and crystal. Eleanor moved further into the space, checking adjoining rooms and service areas. frustration mounting as precious seconds ticked away. If Hassan had already escaped through some predetermined route, she was risking her life for nothing. A noise from the kitchen area drew her attention. Not the sound of evacuation, but the metallic click of a weapon being prepared for fire. Eleanor moved toward it with cautious speed, calculating approaches that would minimize exposure while maximizing visual coverage. She entered the kitchen to find not Hassan, but Adam Ramirez. He stood beside a commercial refrigerator. Tactical gear, replacing his usual professional attire, a military-grade communication device in one hand and a silenced pistol in the other. His expression registered surprise at Eleanor's appearance, quickly masked by the controlled neutrality she remembered from countless operational briefings. "Eleanor," he acknowledged with unsettling calm, "I assumed you'd be well clear by now. Self-preservation was always one of your more reliable traits." "Unlike following orders," she replied, maintaining a safe distance while assessing potential cover and exit routes. "The terminal sanction has been officially countermanded by Director Winters. Standing down is your only legitimate option." Ramirez's smile was cold and without humor. "Legitimacy is a luxury in our line of work. You of all people should understand that." "Why are you still here, Adam?" Eleanor asked, genuine curiosity mixing with tactical assessment. "Your strike arrives in less than 5 minutes. Even you aren't immune to precision munitions." "Loose ends," he replied simply. "Hassan escaped through a maintenance tunnel 3 minutes ago. I was about to pursue when you arrived. Another loose end requiring attention." The casual way he categorized her as an operational liability to be eliminated crystallized for Eleanor how completely she had once been viewed as a weapon rather than a person, a perspective Ramirez had clearly never abandoned. "It's over," she stated with quiet certainty. "The evidence about Sarajevo, about Calliope, it's already beyond your reach. Hassan's documentation, Winters' testimony, my own experience. The truth will emerge regardless of what happens here." Something flickered in Ramirez's eyes. Not fear exactly, but the calculation of a strategist recognizing a significant shift in operational parameters. "Evidence can be discredited. Witnesses can be compromised. Nothing is irreversible, Eleanor. Except 37 children in Sarajevo." She countered, the weight of 15 years of guilt and regret evident in her voice. "Except the decisions that placed them in the crosshairs for political expediency." Ramirez studied her with the clinical detachment that had always made him effective as a handler and terrifying as an adversary. "You still don't understand, even after all these years, Sarajevo wasn't about Hassan, not entirely. It was about you, testing the limits of what our most valuable asset would do when following orders. How far the phantom could be pushed before breaking." The confirmation of what Kevin had revealed earlier still landed with devastating impact. The knowledge that the children's deaths had served dual purposes, each more coldly calculated than the last. "And I failed your test," Eleanor observed quietly. "I walked away." "You succeeded brilliantly," Ramirez corrected. "You completed the mission despite the moral weight. You eliminated the target with perfect efficiency. Then you demonstrated exactly the psychological response we anticipated. Guilt withdrawal, eventual retirement, the perfect operational life cycle for a strategic asset. Predictable, manageable." Until Hassan resurfaced, Eleanor added, understanding, dawning, until he threatened to expose what really happened. "Until you became a liability rather than an asset." Ramirez confirmed, adjusting his grip on the pistol almost imperceptibly, a movement Eleanor recognized as preparation for action. Through her earpiece, Thalia's voice came with urgent clarity. 3 minutes to impact. All personnel should be minimum safe distance from target coordinates." Eleanor made her decision in that moment. Not as the Phantom, not as Eleanor Blackwood, but as the integrated whole she had become through years of reckoning with her past. "We need to leave," she stated simply, "both of us. Whatever happens next, accountability just as consequences. It should come through proper channels, not a conveniently erased building." Ramirez's expression suggested genuine surprise at the offer, the first unguarded reaction she had seen from him in their entire interaction. "You're suggesting we both walk away after everything?" I'm suggesting we both survive to face the consequences of our actions. Eleanor clarified. You through whatever legal proceedings emerge from the exposure of Calliope. Me through the continued weight of knowing what I did in Sarajevo, regardless of how I was manipulated. For a brief moment, something almost like regret crossed Ramirez's features. A glimpse of the man he might have been before decades of shadow operations had reshaped him into something harder and more calculating. There was a time I would have valued your misplaced idealism, Eleanor, he said finally. But the truth is people like us don't get clean resolutions. We get operational parameters and acceptable losses. His weapon raised with the smooth precision of someone who had never lost his edge despite years behind a desk. Eleanor registered the movement with the heightened awareness that had once made her the division's most effective operative body, already shifting to create a more difficult target. The shot never came. Instead, a different sound intruded. The distinctive whistle of an incoming precision munition, its arrival significantly accelerated from the projected timeline. Out! Eleanor shouted, instinct overriding the complex ethical calculations of moments earlier. Now! She lunged toward the nearest exit, a service door leading to delivery bays, expecting Ramirez to follow the same survival instinct that had preserved him through decades of operational hazards. Instead, as she glanced back, she saw him standing motionless, communication device raised to his ear expression, revealing that he had received information that fundamentally altered his assessment. Parameter shift. He said the words not directed at Eleanor, but seemingly at whoever was on the other end of the communication. Accelerated timeline confirmed asset containment protocol, Alpha. Understanding struck Eleanor with terrible clarity. Ramirez had planned for this contingency, had perhaps even engineered the accelerated strike timeline. The containment protocol wasn't about eliminating Hassan anymore. It was about ensuring that everyone with knowledge of Calliope remained within the impact zone, including himself. The division's most fundamental operational principle echoed in her memory. No witnesses, no loose ends. Complete operational security regardless of personal cost. Adam, she called, genuine urgency, overriding tactical considerations. There's still time. Ramirez lowered the communication device, his expression settling into the cold resolve she remembered from mission briefings when particularly difficult decisions had been required. Goodbye, Eleanor. You truly were my finest creation. The building shuddered around them, the first tremors of impact beginning at the structure's core. Eleanor had a final glimpse of Ramirez standing perfectly still, embodying to the last the operational discipline he had demanded from his assets before structural collapse forced her through the service door and into the night beyond. She ran with single-minded focus, calculating blast radius and structural failure patterns based on her knowledge of precision munitions. Behind her, the North Star Hotel began its catastrophic collapse. A controlled demolition disguised as a targeted strike designed to eliminate evidence rather than merely neutralize a threat. The shock wave caught Eleanor 50 yards from the building's perimeter, lifting her from her feet and hurling her against the side of a parked vehicle. Pain blossomed along her left side as ribs cracked from the impact, vision momentarily blurred by the combination of concussive force and debris. Through the disorientation and pain, a single thought maintained clarity. She had survived against operational protocols, against tactical probability, against Ramirez's containment parameters. The Phantom had survived to bear witness, to ensure that Sarajevo's ghosts would finally find voice. As emergency responders converged on the devastation, Eleanor pulled herself to her feet, pain lancing through her damaged ribs with every movement. Her communication equipment had been destroyed in the blast, leaving her isolated from her team, uncertain of their status or position. She moved away from the collapse zone with the practiced stealth that had once been her professional signature, avoiding the gathering emergency personnel and establishing a perimeter that would allow her to observe without being observed. From this vantage point, she watched as the Minneapolis skyline was transformed by smoke and emergency lights, the collapsed hotel creating a wound in the urban landscape that mirrored the one she had carried inside since Sarajevo. Phantom. The voice came from behind her. Tariq approaching with the cautious respect of someone who recognized both her injury and her continued dangerous capability. The evidence, she asked immediately, priorities clear, despite physical distress, secure, already transmitted to multiple locations. He gestured toward a nondescript vehicle parked at the edge of the emergency response perimeter. Your team awaits, they're concerned about your status. Relief washed through Eleanor at the confirmation that her people had survived, that the bonds forged decades earlier and renewed in recent days had not been severed by Ramirez's final act of containment. "Wuwaya Hassan," she inquired, allowing Tariq to support her weight as they moved toward the vehicle. "Safe already departed for a secure location?" He studied her with careful assessment. "You returned for him, even knowing the strike was incoming. Why?" Eleanor considered the question as they walked each step, sending fresh pain through her injured side. "Because truth requires living witnesses. Because accountability matters more than vengeance. Because 37 children in Sarajevo deserve better than an endless cycle of justified killing." Tariq remained silent for several steps, then spoke with unexpected gentleness. "My cousin was among those children, Amina Tariq. She was 9 years old." The name struck Eleanor with physical force. Amina, the child whose face had haunted her dreams for 15 years, whose name she had spoken in her sleep as Robert held her through nightmares. The random chance that had connected her directly to this particular operative seemed too precise for mere coincidence. Too perfect in its circular completion. "I'm sorry." She said simply the words inadequate but necessary. "I have carried her with me every day since Sarajevo." "I know," Tariq replied, surprising her. "It's why Hassan chose to give you the evidence rather than eliminate you as originally planned. Your guilt has been your punishment more effective than any revenge we could have enacted." They reached the vehicle where Eleanor's team waited. Thalia, Marcus, Raiko, and Kevin gathered with the tense alertness of operators in potentially hostile territory. Their expressions reflected relief at Eleanor's appearance, despite her obvious injury, the wordless communication of professionals who understood exactly how close the margin had been. As they helped her into the vehicle preparing for immediate departure from the chaos surrounding the collapsed hotel, Eleanor caught a final glimpse of the destruction behind them. Emergency lights illuminating dust and debris, first responders trying to make sense of a catastrophe whose true causes they might never fully comprehend. Ramirez had orchestrated his final operation with characteristic precision, eliminating himself along with physical evidence, creating a narrative of terrorist attack and necessary response that would satisfy most casual observers. The official record would cite a tragic but required intervention against Hassan al-Sahawi, with regrettable collateral damage minimized through evacuation procedures. But the truth remained, carried in documentation now beyond the division's reach, and Director Winters secured testimony in Eleanor herself, and the team that had stood with her. Sarajevo would finally receive its reckoning, the 37 children acknowledged not as collateral damage, but as deliberate sacrifices on the altar of operational expedience. As the vehicle pulled away from the devastation, Eleanor felt something shift within her. Not the weight of guilt lifting entirely, for that would never completely disappear. 6 months after the Minneapolis disaster, Eleanor Blackwood sits on her Montana porch watching storm clouds gather over distant mountains. Her ribs have healed, but deeper wounds remain, the kind that never fully close. On the table beside her, yesterday's Wall Street Journal with the headline, "Senate Hearings Continue on Covert Ops Scandal." The truth about Sarajevo, about Calliope, about missions conducted without oversight or accountability, has rocked Washington's corridors of power. Pentagon officials resign, intelligence directors face indictment, classified programs undergo unprecedented scrutiny. Eleanor sips bourbon maker's Mark Roberts' favorite and thinks about choices, about triggers pulled and not pulled, about redemption found not in death but in survival and testimony. The satellite phone rings, Thalia calling from D.C., where she'll testify tomorrow before the Congressional Committee. The team remains connected, bound by old wounds and new purpose. "You watching Fox News?" Thalia asks. "They're calling for Winters' resignation over the hearings." "No." Eleanor replies, watching a bald eagle soar above her pasture. "Freedom earned at terrible cost. I'm done watching time to live." As thunder rolls across the valley, Eleanor Blackwood, once the phantom, now simply a witness to history, raises her glass to the gathering storm. Some reckonings cannot be avoided, only faced head-on.